District 10. And who will lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance. Here we go. Thank you so much, and I'd like to also wish Ms. Thesman a very happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Thank you so much for being here. And if I could have Councilmember Nguyen join me at the podium for our first ceremonial.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and please help me welcome to my left, right here, Ankith Marimanda to join us at the podium here. It is my great pleasure that I present this commendation to Ankith Marimanda. He's a senior at the Santa Clara High School. He himself who founded the Human Anatomy for Youth, a club that provides awareness of human anatomy for students seeking to improve their academic performance in science. Ankit started this club in 2016 at Randall Thomas Elementary School in Milpitas. Since then, the club has expanded to Ace Charter School, Laurelwood Elementary, and Cesar Chavez in East Palo Alto. Ankit has spent over 700 hours as volunteer organizing, raising money for after-school programs. Most recently, Ankit organized a benefit concert where he's raised $3,000 for Ace Charter School in my best school, District 7. All right. And the funds he gave greatly helped the after-school program. I'm so thrilled and proud today of him and his leadership and commitment to the youth. And thank you very much for your service to the city of San Jose. And I look forward to hear more about all the wonderful achievements that you will do and continue for our community. Before I would ask the Vice Mayor to give commendation, I would ask Ankit to say a few words, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would first like to start off by saying a huge thank you to Councilman Nguyen and his office and the San Jose City Council for honoring me. It really means a lot. I would first like to thank Ms. Shannon Scoff from Robert Randall Elementary School for giving me my first opportunity to implement my program. I sent 124 emails to schools in the Santa Clara, San Jose, and Milpitas school districts. After 2 long months, I got a reply from Ms. Goff, who decided to take a chance on my program, and for that, I'm truly grateful. I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Poston, the principal of Ace Charter School, and the after-school coordinator, Ms. Miriam, for being so supportive in all aspects of the teaching process. I'd also like to thank Mr. Ryan Hughes, the principal of Cesar Chavez Elementary, and Ms. Kimberly Cheadle for encouraging me to further improve the syllabus of my program. A big thank you to Dr. Hong Nguyen, the former principal of Laurelwood Elementary, for helping me in my efforts to bring new methods of teaching to the classrooms. At this point, I would like to acknowledge the efforts of my helpers, my presidents, Pranshu, who has been helping me with Laurelwood, and Krithi, who has been helping me with Ace Charter. Thank you so much for your help. This summer, I had the opportunity to perform a concert in which I got to combine my interest in Indian music with my love for volunteering. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to my guru, Ramesh Srinivasan, who made this event possible. Last of all, thank you so much to my mother for helping me in all walks of the program, from website development to helping me improve the materials. I would also like to say thank you to my dad for being my closest advisor. The kids I'm teaching are all very inquisitive and talented. They're able to understand in 1 hour material that took me upwards of 2 days to comprehend. I look forward to teaching more children so as to foster a brighter future within the field of human anatomy. Thank you.
All right, stay close together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for all that you do. Councilmember Davis, if you will join me at the podium.
Good afternoon. On Monday, January 7th of 2019, Levi's Stadium will host the 5th annual College Football Playoff National Championship, which will bring an estimated 100,000 visitors to the South Bay. San Jose has a unique opportunity to showcase its beauty and diversity on the national stage, as downtown San Jose will be hosting the championship campus, the epicenter of all fan and media activities during championship weekend. Championship campus activities will include ESPN broadcasts from downtown San Jose, AT&T Playoff Playlist Live free concert series at Discovery Meadow, Playoff Fan Central at San Jose McHenry Convention Center, and Media Day at SAP Center, among many other family-friendly activities and events. These events will not only deliver major economic benefits to San Jose's businesses and the community, but will also leave a lasting impact on classrooms throughout the region through the College Football Playoff Foundation and their Extra Yard for Teachers initiative, which will provide $1 million in support of Bay Area educators. We acknowledge the Bay Area Host Committee today and San Francisco 49ers for hosting this event and welcome them to San Jose to officially begin the 100-day countdown. The 100-day countdown actually begins on Saturday, on September 29th. And in addition to this proclamation, we invite you to join us this Friday on the 28th at 11:30 a.m. in the City Hall Plaza as we raise the College Football Playoff flag to celebrate the 100-day countdown to the national championship. Along with my colleagues on the San Jose City Council, I recognize and thank the College Football Playoff organization for selecting San Jose to host their championship campus. We look forward to our community celebrating and discovering these incredible events as we count down the final 100 days leading to the 2019 College Football Playoff National Championship. One region, one goal, one champion, together as one. Now I will welcome Coach Tyrone Willingham, member of the Bay Area Host Committee Executive Board, to accept the proclamation on their behalf. Now, he doesn't want me to say this, but Coach Willingham is a legend in college football as both a player at Michigan State University and as a coach, including two-time Pac-10 Coach of the Year honors. He coached 7 years at Stanford, 3 years at Notre Dame, and 4 years at the University of Washington. Coach Willingham has also served on the prestigious College Football Playoff Selection Committee, and now he brings his talents back home to work with the Bay Area Host Committee. Coach?
Yeah, thank you. You did tell me. And about the time that I'm lucky enough to get introduced and they say second Pac-10 champ coach of the year, I usually run to the mic and stop them, okay, because I'm not even a legend in my own mind, okay. But it is exciting for me to be here today, and to the mayor, when he arrives, and to the council members and Councilwoman Davis, it is an honor to be a part of an event of this magnitude. Having been a coach and a player in college football, there is nothing like the national championship. And it couldn't be better than to have it in the Bay Area, because there is no area in America that combines intellectual activity and athletic powers. And we have two great universities displaying that this year, and we have an area that thrives on it. So I am so happy to represent the executive board of the host committee to be here today to accept this proclamation. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go. Scooch this way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to it. Councilmember Perales, if you'll join me at the podium.
Thank you. And I'd like to welcome down Kathy and Bev. Yeah, please come and join us. Well, it's my pleasure today to be able to provide this proclamation of suicide awareness or suicide prevention awareness. The City of San Jose recognizes suicide prevention as a citywide health responsibility. Between the years 2011 and 2016, 395 residents of San Jose committed suicide, even though suicide has been proven to be preventable. The National Alliance on Mental Illness in Santa Clara County, or NAMI, is a community-based advocacy organization dedicated to provide support, promoting research, and improving services for those with mental illness. NAMI awareness efforts have successfully decreased barriers to treatment and recovery by reducing the stigma of mental illness. NAMI's education programs have served hundreds of families and individuals that have been affected by suicide and suffer from mental illness. In support of suicide prevention awareness, I am wearing today this wristband to raise awareness of suicide prevention and to decrease the stigma of those with mental illness. Additionally, I have championed a policy for our City Council to adopt a suicide prevention strategic plan that we will be voting on next year in early 2019. Accepting the proclamation today is Kathy Forward, the Executive Director, and Bev Lazoff, Vice President of NAMI of Santa Clara County. Kathy has been one of the principal leaders of NAMI as a volunteer teacher, trainer, education director, and now as the Executive Director. And Bev became involved with NAMI about 10 years ago, wanting to learn more about mental health issues, and has now since become the first Vice President. And it's my honor to ask our Vice Mayor to present Kathy and Bev with the proclamation, or a proclamation for September being Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. Thank you. I'd like to welcome either of you to come. Thank you, Kathy, to come on up.
So thank you very much. This is a very important topic to address, and we really appreciate the city recognizing this month, because really one life lost to suicide is one too many. And it's something that when people live with mental illness that they experience, suicidal thoughts. And it's very important for the community, families, and the people themselves to get this education and support. We also want to recognize other people who are doing this work, all of our providers, the AFSP, the American Federation for Suicide Prevention, and also the county suicide prevention efforts. So thank you very much for taking this time to do that. Deb, you want to?
Yes, I would just like to say that I'm co-president at NAMI now, and that's because the person who had been president, Vic Ojakian, asked me to be his co-president. And I would like to acknowledge Vic here officially because he has worked so diligently on suicide prevention for the last 12 plus years after the death of his own son. So he would have loved to have been here today. I would have loved to have him in my place, but he was not able to make it. So thank you so much.
Thank you all, and thank you, Vice Mayor Carrasco, for taking over. I apologize, I had to handle some matters relating to pending federal regulatory action at the FCC. But appreciate all the members of the community who have come out as part of the afternoon ceremonials. We're now on to orders of the day, and I'm going to ask if anyone on the council has any changes to the printed agenda. I'm guessing that we won't be able to see signals. Is that right? Okay, so Councilmember Arenas, I believe, is looking for continuance on item 10.3. Did you want to say anything, or would you simply? You know what? I think we have 3 mics. Is that right?
Well, I would just like to explain this request for a continuance to my colleagues. This is regarding the Dove Hill project, and
Keep that one on that side.
my colleagues were very understanding in my last request for a continuance, and that was so that my community can have an opportunity to come together at a community meeting to understand the project further and to ask questions. And so as a result from that meeting, there were some issues that came up that we asked planning to look into a little bit further, and so there was a deadline for a supplemental memo. Unfortunately, I know that there's a lot of work to be done, and we received that yesterday at the end of the day, and so my residents are asking that that I request for a continuance because it's a 30-page document, and there's a lot to absorb, and so for them to be able to take a look at that more carefully and thoughtfully, I would request for a continuance. We have been meeting together, and we've been discussing this project, and so we're moving ahead, and we just need a little more time.
Thank you, Councilmember Arenas. All right, is that a motion?
Yes.
All right, that's a motion approves orders of the day with a continuance to item 10.3. Would anyone like to be heard on orders of the day? Councilmember Camus?
Yeah, I was just wondering, did any of the project parameters actually change? Is the project being changed in any way?
No, there were some recommendations around traffic, and there was recommendations about a 3-way stop sign, which was already part of the developer's plan, markings on a lane to further improve safety, and an electronic speed sign, which is outside of the nexus of the project, but I think the developer is amenable to that. But the three recommendations were just all under traffic, and they were pretty minor, but I think there's still there's a lot of supplemental information that is added to those 3 recommendations. That there's a lot of information for residents to understand.
Yeah, and this is kind of unusual. This is the 3rd time we've postponed this thing. What is the developer, how is it going to affect his timeline on construction?
I spoke with Sal Caruso this morning. I told him about my intention to delay it. He's on the same page with me on this. As well as, of course, our residents are on the same page as in terms of having a continuance. So he's not here to object. You're not going to hear, I don't think, any calls objecting to this continuance. I don't think you've received any so far. And so I think everybody's on board to further delay this a little bit. Okay. And like I said, we weren't planning to have another continuance, but the supplemental memo was expected to come out on Friday, giving folks a couple of days just to absorb the information, look through it, ask questions. But that's not the way it happened.
So is it okay to not have a special evening meeting? I know Councilmember Jones, if he was here, would be asking this question.
Thank you for channeling Councilmember Jones.
Well, I can't speak for Councilmember Jones, what he would request, but if we want to do a afternoon, a time certain, I think my community would be very open to it if we can have it at later in the day of the afternoon session,
So-
closer to 5, so that people can get here.
Right.
Because obviously, they're coming from work. So I would just ask for a late time. So
For no earlier than 5 o'clock.
no
Yeah.
earlier than 5 o'clock.
Okay, that's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, and Councilmember Rennes, this is for how many weeks? One,
This is for October 23rd.
October 23rd.
October
Okay.
23rd, and we can have the time certain. It was going to be for the evening, but I think hearing Councilmember Camus's suggestion and concern, I'm open to also having this a time certain, no sooner than 5 p.m.
Okay, why don't we, I know that planning probably just needs a date for notice. Is that right? No. Okay. We'll work on the noticing. Okay, through rules. Okay, great. Any other questions on the motion? Let's vote. Can we vote electronically? Let's give it a shot. If not, we'll go old school. Cool. All right. We're on to the closed session report. Rick?
No report. Oh, sorry. No, that's all right. There's no report.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, next is the consent calendar. Any items that council would like to pull? I understand Council Member Davis would like to pull item 2.6. And are there any other items? I'm looking to my left.
Yep. 2.5,
Looking.
please.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was 2.5 and 2.6?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Okay. So we're pulling 2.5 and 2.6. Are there any other items to be pulled? Seeing no hands, we'll entertain a motion to approve the remainder.
Second.
Motion from the Vice Mayor and second. Let's vote on the remainder of the consent items. I don't have any cards. Is that right, Mackenzie? Okay, great. All right, we're on to 2.5. Councilmember Davis?
Thank you, Mayor. Yesterday, Councilmember Jimenez and I traveled to the city of Campbell to attend Assemblymember Evan Lowe's State of the District address. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is because sometimes council travel actually can pay. And we received a very large check in the amount of $6.1 million from SB1 funds
Yes.
from Assemblymember Lowe. So I wanted to present you
Thank you.
and our city manager with this check
Yes.
today.
Happily accept this check. Thank you very much.
Are you gonna
Councilmember
be filing-
Davis, establishing that travel does pay. I hope they didn't require a visa to get across the city limits.
They were very gracious.
Are you going to ask for reimbursement for the travel expenses?
No, I think it's covered.
Okay.
Do I have to move that?
Well, we can move it with 2.6 if you want to move on to 2.6.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so for 2.6, that's the retirement board's report out. And so the last week, the Federated Pension Board met on Thursday, and I just have a couple of items I want to share with my council colleagues. One is about the overpayment, the pensionable earnings corrections. There will be a letter sent to the city about the amount that will be added to the unfunded liability. I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware. The action that was taken on Thursday was to decide to charge an interest rate to the city for that amount using the assumed rate of return. So there was a little bit of discussion about what the interest rate would be unless we want to pay a lump sum amount. So those will be the two options that come to the letter, in the letter to the city. The other item is that I just wanted to let everybody know that the CIO for retirement services hired an advisor to look at a possible venture capital strategy, investment strategy, and his name is Dr. Ashby Monk. He's a researcher at Stanford he's an economist, and he's been doing a lot on investments, and they're just starting their work. They'll be writing a business plan for the boards to consider. There was a lot of board discussion about this, with one board member saying it's very difficult to make money in venture capital, so there's a little bit of skepticism about whether or not they would end up adopting a strategy. But that is definitely something that they'll be discussing probably early 2019. And then finally, they redid their asset allocation. It will be effective in October and fully implemented by January. But what they're going to do, which is something different from what they've done before, is that they will be initially using passive investment vehicles to get to their allocation mix more quickly than they have been able to in the past. And it will also save some management fees in the short term. And that's the end of my report.
Councilmember Davis, any comments on the report or questions? I did have one. I'm just very concerned to the extent to which the boards are increasingly looking at investing in what are very high fee generating investment instruments and options. Venture capital is not for the wary of heart. This is not something cities or public agencies typically jump into. I know that certainly less transparency in venture capital, there's certainly higher risk, and there's certainly much higher fees for managers. All those things are things that give me concern and pause, particularly given the very rapid escalation we've seen in the allocation of fees to managers in the funds over the last several years, and across a host of instruments, including the hedge funds and real estate and other assets. So I'm just very, very concerned about that direction, and perhaps we will have more engagement and dialogue with the funds and the boards moving forward. Did you want to respond in any way? Or?
Yes, the board did have a lot of discussion about that very same issue, and the discussion from Dr. Monk and the CIO Polani was that they were inclined to avoid the Series A investing, but they were looking at they're going to be looking closely at the model that the UC uses, which is actually to be their own venture capital organization, and they're not saying they're going to do this, but they're just thinking about what basically what comparative advantages we have as being located in the center of Silicon Valley, and whether or not the boards might be able to take advantage of that and reduce risk, but still get in early on tech investments. I think like I said, there's a lot of skepticism in the board. There's a lot more work to be done. So they're willing to listen, but no one is ready. And I think I would include the CIO in that. No one is ready to jump right now.
Great. That's encouraging. Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Arenas?
Thank you. So my question is, I thought I heard you say, Councilmember Davis, that they're redoing their asset allocation and using more passive investment tools or vehicles. I forgot what the term was. So it sounds like, I mean, it's incongruent with the venture capital plan. So is this a way of creating a balance? I guess I'm a little confused there.
Good question. So the asset allocation using the passive vehicles is what they're going to do initially as they to get them to their asset allocation more quickly. So what they've done in the past is they have passed an asset allocation, and then it's taken them almost a whole year or more even to get to that actual allocation, because they just have such huge amounts of funds, and some of what they're investing in are private investments that are time bound. And so that's why they're using the passive vehicles in the short term while they evaluate managers and while they wait for other funds to open up. Thank you. You're welcome.
Other council members? Okay. You made a motion before. Was that as to both items, 2.5 and 2.6?
Yes, it was.
Okay, and that's all right with the seconder. All right, let's vote on the motion. All right, we're on to item 7.1, which is the Community Energy Revolving Credit Agreement. We're skipping ahead here, so I believe there's some time sensitivity. Lori, there's no presentation, is there? No. Okay. Any questions from the council? We're on 7.1, which is the Community Energy Revolving Credit Agreement. I believe this is the 35 million. Excuse me, 50 million with Barclays. Okay. There's a motion and a second. Any comments or questions? All right, let's vote on 7.1. All right, that passes. We'll jump back now on the calendar to item 3.1, which is a report of our city manager.
No report today.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Back to the booth. Councilmember Camus. Oh, there is a question.
So I know we sent a communique to the county manager on Project Hope, but I didn't hear back from you on whether it was accepted or any further discussions on that item.
Yeah, I can provide an update on that. So the county executive acknowledged our letter, and we have since executed a lease with the county, and the county is proceeding with deployment of the Hope Village at the site. I don't see Lee in the audience, but I do believe they're planning to be able to move the residents in on Wednesday or Thursday of this week.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Unless there are other questions, we'll move on to item 4.1, which is the San Jose Stage Company Equipment Assistance Grant Agreement. And Carrie Adams-Hapner is here to present. Welcome, Carrie. Now, let's see. How do we do this? I guess you grab a mic here. We'll improvise a bit.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Carrie Adams-Hapner. I'm the Director of the Office of Cultural Affairs. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. I'm here with Karen Park, Senior Art Coordinator from the Office of Cultural Affairs. Our recommendation for you this afternoon is to approve an equipment assistance agreement with the San Jose Stage Company, also known as The Stage, for an amount of $1 million for modern theater equipment and furniture to be installed in a new mixed-use renovated facility located at 490 South First Street. The $1 million in grant funds was appropriated by the council in the 16-17 budget for facility acquisition. Subsequently, the stage leadership has requested with assistance for the cost for theater equipment and furnishings for its new theater in order to catalyze its fundraising for the build-out phase of its facility expansion, which is expected to be about $4.5 million. This grant will support new lighting, sound, audio and video, seating, and other furnishings. Oops. Excuse me. Did I go too far? No. So this is a successor agency property, and in February of 2014, the Sarah Oversight Board approved the long-range property management plan for the remaining RDA properties. At that same time, it approved a direct sale process for the stage property, whereby the property would be offered for sale to the stage. In April of this year, the Oversight Board approved the sale of the stage property for $2.3 million based on a fair market value appraisal. I'm now going to turn it over to Karen Park. Thank you.
So a little bit about the stage. The stage was established in 1983 as a nonprofit theater company, and it recently celebrated its 35th year anniversary last year. In 1999, the stage gained the distinction of being the first arts group to build out and lease its own theater facility from the redevelopment agency, making it the original anchor organization in SOFA, even before it was SOFA. So two of the stage's key founders, Randy and Kathleen King, will be honored this year with the Cornerstone of the Arts Award on October 12th at the Hammer. We hope most of you will be able to attend and celebrate with us. So the stage is recognized as an award-winning Bay Area off-Broadway theater and attracts audiences of 30,000 annually to the downtown and employs over 150 artists with an economic impact of $1.9 million annually. Its high artistic caliber, community responsiveness, and sound management practices have kept the organization running consistent surpluses for the last 9 years. So after leasing its facility for almost 20 years, the stage began negotiating with Sarah to purchase its facility so that it could secure its future as a vital force in downtown's economic and creative landscape. The stage has raised $2.3 million from private and public partners, including a $435,000 grant from the county and the remaining from private financing. The stage deposited the required $230,000. That's 10% in escrow in June, and it's on schedule to close escrow on October 9th. The stage's new theater will be part of a mixed-use development that's going to be developed with private partners, with the theater anchoring the ground floor. The new theater is going to seat 325 with an expanded 20,000 square foot facility, and that will be a regional draw with modern equipment, scene shop, dressing rooms, and offices for staff. It's also going to include a cafe and cabaret space in the lobby that's going to enhance the overall audience experience there. The stage has noted that the city's $1 million investment towards equipment and furnishings will play an important role as a catalyst to leverage the additional $3.5 million to meet its campaign goals. The organization has already started to assemble a strong capital campaign committee comprised of longtime supporters and respected community leaders. And the capital campaign feasibility study showed a positive indication that it can raise the funds to support its new theater through a phased approach. And I'll turn it back to Carrie, who will review the terms of the agreement.
Thank you, Karen. So we have been working very closely with the San Jose Stage leadership, its staff, and its board to develop the following terms. First, as I noted, they did request for funding for equipment and furniture, lighting, sound, and seating specifically. There will be a covenant on the property that will guarantee that this theater condo will remain a cultural facility in perpetuity. And this is regardless of who owns the facility. And this is actually a term that was fully embraced by the stage leadership because we want to ensure that our SOFA Cultural District remains an active cultural and arts district. The next term is that the grant will be awarded when the stage submits for building permits for theater tenant improvements within 2 years. And as part of this grant term, we will have the ability to use the facility 12 times a year at free rental costs. And then finally, the city will have security interest in the equipment and the furniture. So in closing, I just want to say, your approval of this grant will have great public value. There will be increased vibrancy in the SOFA Cultural District, and as well as increased economic impact. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the council. I also want to thank the staff and the board leadership at the San Jose Stage Company, because I know you are all stepping up significantly and you're going to have a lot of funds to raise. So we really want to thank you for your service. So thank you, and that will now take any questions.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks to Kathleen, Randy, for all your work for all these years and spearheading arts in our downtown. And we know it has been not easy in many years to do that, but you've done an incredible job, and we're grateful for all that you've brought to our community. I also want to thank the many board members, Jerry Stranges and many others who have been working hard to raise the dollars. I see Elizabeth Monley and others. We're just grateful for all that's being done. I don't have any cards. Mackenzie, do you have any? Jerry, did you want to speak? Come on down. I know we have a challenge with mics, so I think Carrie may hand you a mic. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We'll honored and proud today to be here as a board member on behalf of the stage company. But before I thank all of you and your staff, I really have to recant about 30 years ago, a guy named Frank Taylor, Bob Leninger, Bob Ruff, were supportive of the San Jose Stage Company in trying to find a theater, community arts theater that would support SOFA. And we've done that in 30 years. We've been the heart and soul of SOFA. It's good to be here today and to thank you, and especially your staff, Office of Economic Development, Nancy and Kim, especially Carrie and Karen, in working through these issues. We're poised to buy the property next month, and we're poised to move forward with our development partner, which, as you probably know, is Swinson. Swinson was the guy that got us in the building 30 years ago. It was an abandoned tire shop, and he renovated it with the help of the redevelopment agency to get what we have now. So we've made a lot of progress in 30 years, being the off-Broadway theater that is representing the Bay Area, and we want to continue to do that for another 30 years. So your support today is going to go a long way toward accomplishing that goal, and we're happy to be able to move forward with that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jerry. Councilmember Pross?
Hello. Oh, there we go.
Takes a second usually.
Does take a second. Thank you. Well, thank you. And I'll be brief. I want to say thank you to staff as well. Thank you to the stage company, Jerry, and the entire board. It really has been really the heart and soul of SOFA District. And now, as we know, and for those that were out at Viva Calle on Sunday or the SOFA Street Fair that followed, you just know how vibrant that area is. And it's glowing, and the stage has been making that happen for 30 years. And so just really happy to be able to make the motion to support this. So, great.
Thank you. Motion from Councilmember Pross, second by Councilmember Rocha. Councilmember Rocha, did you want to speak? If you turn it on, it takes a second before it'll actually
I will join the echo in thanking city staff, Carrie, and also the stage company for all your work and staying committed to this particular project. I know these things don't happen quickly or easily, and I know a lot of work from the board and our city staff was put into this. It's really a testament to the folks' commitment to the arts community, and I, for one, am grateful for all the work that you've done. And I also want to acknowledge District 9 resident Sarah Conway from presentation. Go ahead and give us a wave, Sarah. Thanks for being here. I think she's a little embarrassed. She doesn't want to acknowledge for coming here for her class. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Councilmember. I had just a quick question, and I don't know if Kathleen or Jerry or who would want to answer this. I just want to make sure I understand clearly who's got the fee title on the site. That it's going to be San Jose Stage. Is that right? Okay. Because I know you've got other contributors, and sometimes those other contributors have conditions on their grants. And I just want to understand clearly, Kathleen, if you just had a minute just to tell us, or Jerry, I just want to make sure I clearly understand it's staying with San Jose Stage. And if it's not, then what are the circumstances?
Yeah, the stage. Yeah, so it is the San Jose Stage Company that's acquiring the property, 100% fee interest. We've actually this morning got the allocation from the county.
Great.
So that's...
And there are no conditions on that grant in terms of property?
Theater and perpetuity, same kind of issues that
same thing we
city
have.
has. Yeah.
Okay.
And then our development partners providing us a loan.
Right.
It's a first loan and deed of trust. With all the rights that we have, but we will, the stage company will own the property 100%.
Okay, that's great. And then at this point, do we have any concepts, or is that on its way? Concepts in terms of development? I know that there's...
Sure. You know, we would hope, Mr. Mayor, that by next year, hopefully earlier than later, an actual development proposal would come forth.
Great.
We're actually looking at a lot of different options. With the single biggest factor being you have to have a theater on the bottom floor.
Mm-hmm.
And so what can you build above? We're looking at stuff like a hotel, potentially, and maybe it's something else. The county has offered support with their housing funds, and that could be a possibility. But for now, we're happy to just simply acquire the property. The support you're giving us today puts that money in the bank so we can start raising money off of that for the improvements that we know we'll need to have to for a new theater. But our absolute intent and vision here is to have a new building with a brand new theater on the bottom floor sooner than later.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. Nancy, I see you want to get a word in.
Mayor and Council, Nancy Klein. Jerry, could you stay? I just want to make sure, full understanding. If for whatever reason the project was not successful, the city has a condo in effect, just so we're clear, for an ongoing theater, or if not a theater, a cultural facility. So that gets put as a deed restriction as soon as it closes escrow. And in any case, the city is protected to have that space. It's my understanding, and Jerry, please confirm, that the county would have the backup deed restriction on the land. So I just want to make sure you have just the full information.
Okay. And their deed restriction is the same as our deed restriction?
If the project that we're pursuing would be a combination of a hotel or a commercial use and theater, it would be in the future that they would seek probably for an affordable housing or housing project with the theater. But that is not what is intended. It's intended for a commercial use and the theater. No matter what happens, the theater would always be at the ground level, so we're protected. But just want to make sure we're being very crystal clear about the different restrictions.
That's helpful. And Nancy, maybe you could keep the mic for a second, because I just want to make sure I understand clearly. So obviously we all want this to be fabulously successful. Whatever gets built on top of the theater is what gets built. But if for some reason nothing gets built, the city has an option to purchase, to acquire essentially condo space on the ground floor, or what?
Whatever gets built would have to have a theater or a cultural facility in it.
Right. But you described our interest as essentially
and we would
having...
have a condo for that space.
All right. Is that the same as essentially a fee interest in that condo, or an option?
The condo has a fee interest.
I see. Okay. That's helpful. And I'm sorry to get into all these details. It's just we know it gets messy. And, again, we all want this to be successful. I just want to make sure we're clear about what Plan B is. Okay. Great. Any other questions? Councilmember, yep.
Sorry. I just want to say that I'm really happy this is happening. Congrats, and please take this council vote into account as you're drafting the next year's Monday Night Live. Thanks.
Yeah. Lund wants to do stand-up, I think. All right. Thank you, Jerry. Any other questions or comments? All right, let's vote on the motion from Councilmember Perales. That passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, we're on to item 4.2, which is the CAPER, and we have a presentation, I believe, from our housing department. Welcome, Jackie and team.
Great, thank you. I'm Jackie Morales-Ferrand, and I'm the director of the Housing Department, and I'm joined today by Kristen Clements, who is our division manager, and Robert Lopez, who works on our grants programs. So every year we come before you to deliver our annual report on our performance as it relates to all of our federal funds. As part of the whole cycle of federal funding, you first approve an action plan, we implement the action plan, and then we report on the results. And so this is looking backwards in our previous fiscal year. In reporting to you what our results have been. So one thing to note is that we actually expended close to $22 million in federal funds in our community that went out the door last year. And those federal funds were invested via the HOME program, which funds affordable housing development, our ESG program, which funds homeless services and shelter programs, predominantly homeless services and outreach, our HOPWA program, which provides services for people who are living with AIDS, and then our Community Development Block Grant program, which is the largest of all 4 of the programs. And it has a variety of uses, which include housing, public service, which are essentially services to our communities. We also do capital improvements, both for the city, on behalf of the city, and for nonprofits. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Clements, who's going to share with you a few of the programs and what we were able to accomplish over the past year.
Thank you, Jackie. Good afternoon. I wanted just to make a note that this slide updates Table A in the original memo, and so that's because last-minute updates from the HUD reimbursement system were reflected in this presentation and referenced in the supplemental. We just wanted to highlight a handful of good things that our federal funds do in our community. One of the most visible is that it helps us produce affordable housing. Here's a rendering for 2nd Street Studios. That's at 2nd and Keys. It's one of the city's, actually it's the city's first permanent supportive housing project, all for homeless households. And in total, there are over 300 affordable apartments that are being produced as a result of federal funds investments. We also funded tenant-based rental assistance, and we're housing 29 homeless households. A lot of our funding priorities focus on how do we help the people most vulnerable in our community, and that has been our homeless priorities. This next slide is a highlight of some of the outcomes. We only get to invest a little bit of our community development block grant, 15%, in administering services. And so this is an excerpt of all of the homeless work that we have funded. This is what the federal funds have done. There are a lot of people being served through outreach and a lot of touches on, as they call them, for outreach, a lot of contact, because we know it takes 3 and 4 times to help people kind of respond to the offers of assistance and screening with the vulnerability index. There are folks who are going through job training programs and receiving rental assistance. And on the next slide, we'll see a picture. There are hundreds of people who are going to be helped by our capital investments of CDBG dollars as well. Isn't this beautiful? This is our really right next door to San Jose City Hall. It's just south at the First Christian Church. And we spent about 3 years committing and then seeing them through rehab of their services, of their spaces here. And so it's beautiful. It is a community space designed for the homeless and other vulnerable people in the community. We used CDBG to rehab the common area and classrooms and updated the kitchen. And the people that this is serving is those traumatized by addiction, the homeless, and those who have mental health challenges. They've got a membership organization with recovery circles for peer support and accountability groups, life and recovery skills, job skills and training. They've got this barista bar there, and they offer meals, and again, really a lot of people going through this beautiful space right in the downtown. So that was just a quick highlight of some of the outcomes that are listed in the memo and in our draft report. We every year we look back at the previous fiscal and report to HUD how we did, and this is the third of our 5-year period when we do our overarching consolidated plan every 5 years. We took this to NSC and to the Housing and Community Development Commission on the 13th. This city council is the 3rd public meeting, the 2nd that was noticed publicly in several languages. And then in just a few days, we're going to meet our deadline to submit to HUD. And with that, we'll welcome any questions.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Jackie. Okay, questions from the council. Councilmember Camus?
All right. Thank you for the report. And if we can go back to slide 3, then slide 4. Yeah, 3 first. Here it says 29 homeless households housed. And then number 4, can you go to that? It says 9 homeless households received rental assistance. And that's confusing. There's a 20 household difference. Are they combined or are they?
Yeah, I think the clarification for this one is in the first, on slide 3, the 29 homeless households were through our HOPWA program, our housing opportunities for people with
Through the what program?
The
Sorry.
HOPWA program, housing
HOPWA?
opportunities with people with AIDS, and also through our home tenant-based rental assistance. In slide 4, the 9 homeless households are from our ESG rapid rehousing program. And I think that that's the clarification between those.
So we probably should have included both. So we probably should have included the 29 plus the 9 for total homeless households.
Okay. All right. 38. Yes. Are you doing?
And I think actually I just realized what the difference is. So typically on that last slide, going back, is what I think what we did that distinguishes them and why they're on 2 different slides is one is about the actual building potentially. And so these are buildings, housing opportunities. And when you go to the next slide, those people are receiving rental assistance. So they're going out into the open market and finding their own homes.
Okay. Well, either way, I think having them find homes is a good step, and I appreciate that. So we're only talking about the 21 million. Okay, if you can go back to the first or second slide. We're only talking about that pot of money that's 21,604,000, correct? And
correct.
Okay. And so that being said, I saw your supplemental memo as well, and I know that we only housed or we only opened up the Plaza Hotel and provided 64 units. I often, I'm very supportive of housing people. Right? But I often feel like we as a city council send you into so many different directions that we actually are not concentrating on building permanent housing. And I know the Second Street is coming, which is fantastic. And when are we, and in your memo, you had another 900 or I forget the number and I've been trying to bring it up, but I'm having a little, problem getting that memo up, but you had another 900 going. I think we approved a ton of. I've been approving housing since I've been in office 5.5 years, and some of the things that I approved, I don't even remember. I don't know when they're going to come up, and I feel that for $21 million being spent on this just this year, we should have gotten more than 38 people housed.
Right. So the 21 million includes all of these programs, and they're not all housing programs to begin with. And I think what you're referring to is our housing production report, which is what you just recently saw.
Yes.
And in that report, it indicates that there are 426 affordable units that are currently in the development process. And so they're going to be completed somewhere between 2018 and 2019. So within the next 18 months, we're going to have a total of 594 units that will open up.
Good. Yes.
So
what
it does take time to get through the development process. And then we have an additional 270 units that are in pre-development. And then finally, which is what creates the 928 units that we have some level of investment in.
Okay. Yeah, if you go back to that, the slide where we have outreach numbers, 5,455 outreach, but only 9 homeless households received. For me, that's not a great number. To actually talk, or I guess you talk to 882 people, and well, I don't know what the goal is here, but you've touched 5,455 people, and only 68 homeless individuals participated in job training, but only 9 homeless actually received rental assistance. To me, I think we should be doing more than that. What kind of goals do you have for the people who are going out to do outreach?
Right. So on the outreach side, that's actually a really good question because we've received that question multiple times regarding why we're not seeing a greater return in terms of outcomes for people who get outreach. Why aren't they going into housing? And part of it is because the goal of the outreach program is really to connect people to services and to actually have them interviewed so that they become part of the housing queue. So the housing queue is operated by the county, and it prioritizes people for housing based on need and based on their specific conditions. So it could be that we conduct outreach, and Robert could be one of the people, but Robert has a lower priority in the queue. So we're not going to be able to get him into permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing just because of the fact we made outreach to him, because we're going to pick the people with the greatest need once we have a housing opportunity available. But we do want to make sure that Robert understands that there are shelter opportunities and that there are medical opportunities, that we have a shower program, there are places for Robert to get food. So there are other services that we can provide Robert while he's living on the streets. But the actual housing is really coordinated through one entry point, and the priority is based on need. So Robert may not be the highest, most neediest person on the street, and we're really trying to house people who use most of our systems because of their need. We want to get them housed as quickly as possible. So we don't anticipate that our outreach will have a great impact on actually housing people. We actually performed better than the HUD standard. So I think the HUD standard was said something like 10% of people who are connected through outreach actually get housed, and our outreach workers have a higher percentage than the HUD standard.
Yeah, and to me, I just don't like to see people on the streets and suffering. And when I went to visit a homeless camp recently, there were 3 different organizations that came to do outreach. And it feels like we may be spending a lot of money on outreach, and we should potentially be spending more money on vouchers for some of these folks who may not rise to the level of need by the county standards, but may be able to get off the street faster than, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, there's so many people doing outreach that I couldn't believe it. Within a 1 hour period of time, 3 separate agencies came out and visited this one encampment that I went to visit.
So we actually don't have a lot of people given the scale of our the number of people who are homeless in the community. We don't have a huge number of outreach workers. So you probably saw 3 different teams that came out. You saw the county has their own team right now that they recently created, and the city has the city has a downtown team that is operated by PATH, and then we have a citywide team that's operated by Home First. So that's probably each of the outreach teams came in to visit.
Those are all 3 of the agencies
so
that I saw.
So they all 3 came in to check in on how this community was doing. But I did want to let you know we actually have 3 different housing programs that are supported by all of our funding in different ways. So we have permanent supportive housing, which is for people who are chronically homeless and which means they've been on the streets for more than 2 years and have a disabling condition. And the chronically homeless are the ones that use our systems more than any other homeless person does. And so there's a huge priority to get people off the streets and into permanent supportive housing in order to lessen the financial impact on both the city and the county. So that's one program. Then we have a rapid rehousing program, and that program targets people who haven't been on the street very long, who have the potential to work, and then can stabilize themselves through their job by getting into housing. The Plaza Hotel is an interim housing solution for people who have jobs who haven't been able to find housing on their own and who need just a little bit of help to get off the streets in order to find permanent housing. And then our third housing program is a prevention program that we work with Destination Home in the county. And in that case, we want to keep people into their housing before they end up on the streets, because that's the most cost-effective way, is if we prevent people from being homeless, that increases their ability to stay in their home. That's a better approach than having them go into homelessness and then catching them through the system. We need outreach workers in order to identify people who are eligible for housing and who can then, when the housing becomes available, get them into housing as quickly as possible. So for example, 2nd Street Studio, we have 132 people. 56 homeless people have already been qualified to move in November. But it's September right now. And we have to be able to track them between September and when the property opens up. And our outreach workers will help us to do that.
And I agree, but also this is not the only funds we spend on this stuff. I know that last year we dedicated another $5 million of general fund dollars, and this year's $8 million. And I know that you get other funds through other things. And perhaps maybe we should be looking at a chart where you talked about the 3 programs rather than kind of this a little bit of confusing presentation that we have here.
Right. So for this presentation, we just focus on the federal funds because it's a federal report. We will be doing a comprehensive homeless report on all the different programs we operated this past year, and we'll be doing that in November. So you'll be getting a more comprehensive approach that will show all of our funding and what we were able to accomplish through all of that funding.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. I know there was someone who wanted to speak on my left. Nope. Okay. Councilmember Jimenez.
Thank you, Mayor. I realize this is essentially what we're doing is reporting out, but I, like Councilmember Camus, couldn't help but just look at some of the numbers and such, just because it's something we deal with day in and day out in the community, and we really hear a lot of concerns from both homeless advocates as well as those neighbors that, quite frankly, sometimes feel that maybe people living on the street should be locked up or things of that nature, right? So we get everything on the spectrum, and so I just have a few questions just to better understand how things work. I too agree with Councilmember Camus is that I feel like there's a lot of funds moving around, and I understand these are federal funds, which helps me sort of categorize it, but I sense that there's obviously a bunch of other funds floating around that do different things that I feel like I need a comprehensive sheet with colors and diagrams to tell me where the money's being spent so I can better understand it. So a few questions that I had were, one is with regard to the money used for responding to homelessness and its impacts in the community, right? It's that category. I think, and I don't think this number was updated given the supplemental memo, but I think comes out to $2,446,694. And so what I was curious about is what is the breakdown with regard to the allocation to PATH and Home First? Because maybe I missed it in the report, but because it gives the whole number, and I was just curious if, like, are they essentially splitting up that amount? So if you look at Table A, I think maybe that Table A was split up.
For PATH and Home First, they primarily receive CDBG and ESG funding, and for this past year, I believe it was about approximately $700,000 for Home First and about $400,000 for PATH. So that's how those two agencies break down, but we also have Bill Wilson under the Responding to Homelessness as well.
Right, okay. And I was thinking mainly of homeless. Well, I guess Bill Wilson's doing homeless outreach as well?
They were doing our rapid rehousing and supportive services.
Yeah, I guess I'm more just thinking of people that are out, the organizations, PATH and Home First, that are doing the outreach to folks on the street, right?
That's correct.
Those are, okay. And it makes sense, right? Because I didn't see and I apologize if I missed a breakdown, because it seems to me if Home First is doing the citywide outreach, they'd probably get more of an allocation, right? And it seems to match up with what I suspected. And so a few things that stood out to me is and just a question to help clarify my thinking is that the only difference between Home First and I'm sure there's a lot of differences between the organizations. I'm sure they would point out their differences, but just to simplify it, the main difference is that PATH focuses in on downtown and Home First is citywide. Is that a fair assessment?
That's correct. And also PATH, or I should say Home First, also responds to our homeless hotline requests. So if we get a report of an encampment, then PATH is giving the opportunity to go out.
And as far as I've never had the benefit of having PATH and Home First in my office and asking them questions and such, but maybe I will. but the question is, I want to read to you a little bit about there's a question here in what I'm about to share. But so, for example, I read in the report that it seems that Home First had 612 unduplicated individuals, right, which makes sense because they're citywide, while only 14% of those, right, 85 people moved from the street to permanent housing destination or temporary destination or institutional destination. And then PATH had contact with 439 unduplicated individuals, less than that, right, which they're only downtown, so it makes sense, whereby 37% of their clients, so 162 people, moved from the street to temporary destinations, institutional destinations. I'm curious about the difference. There seems to be a difference there, and I'm not sure if it's the approach by which the programs or the organizations are moving forward, or maybe the way they address or they handle things. I guess I'm just trying to better understand why that difference exists, because it seems just on paper that maybe PATH is having more success, and I'm just trying to understand why that is.
Yeah, I think it's a number of things, and I wish Kelly was here from our homelessness response team to help me with this question, but I know it's definitely approach. PATH does a more, they go out to they know the downtown core really well, and they have a very small area to focus on, while Home First has more of a citywide approach. So they're all over the city, and they're probably not making as many approaches with their clients as maybe PATH is, and getting to know them more. And becoming a lot more, developing that rapport to get them into a motel or to a shelter. So I think it's definitely part of the approach, but also part of the scope of their location.
Yeah, I also wondered if the fact that PATH, gets to focus on downtown, if there's some value to that, right?
Right, and I think that's what Robert was saying, was that the territory that Home First covers is the entire city. PATH only covers the downtown. So their ability to make a deeper and stronger connection is much different than what the other Home First is able to do. And so they're offering completely different services just because of the capacity level and amount of contact that they're going to have with the same individuals. And then the last thing I just wanted to emphasize was when you compare their ability to move people into housing, the HUD standard, or what the majority of people across the country who do outreach are able to do, is 10%. So the fact that we're seeing a higher number means that people are able to connect them to the resources when they're identified on the queue as being a high priority client.
And so that number, you say the HUD standard 10%. So for example, Home First had 14%, so they're exceeding the HUD standard, right?
Correct.
But I think, so I appreciate that. I mean, there need to be standards, but I really do think that it should all be higher, right? I think that's what we all strive for, right? I guess, and that's, I don't want to even call it frustration, but that's the thing that I think we all strive for, right? For it to be higher.
Sure, but if you also look at that 30% number from PATH, it includes both permanent and temporary housing. So as Robert said, because they're working with a smaller group and they both have access to resources to put people into temporary housing. But I think we see it more with PATH because PATH has a smaller group. They're working with about 120 individuals that live in the downtown, is in comparison to the 3,000 plus that Home First is working with.
Yeah.
So they have an ability to really develop a deeper relationship with people, and when they see people who are getting into situations where their distress is increasing because of living on the streets, they have an ability to put somebody temporarily into a hotel.
Yeah, I appreciate that. A question as it relates to that, and a few questions. So one is, so this is a 5-year plan, right? I think it expires 2020, right? Is the what I
Correct.
read. And so these contracts with Home First, with Path, and I know there's a lot more in the report, but that's sort of what I'm focusing on now. When are those up for, renegotiation, for example, as an example? I mean, do those extend out many, many more years?
You just approved it last week.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
So we just approved all the new outreach contracts last week.
Okay, thank you. Again, I think I think the challenge is that there's a lot going on and there's a lot of money floating around, so I don't always know if this is, I mean, I guess I should have known, but I appreciate that. And so how long can you remind me how long those contracts last? Or are they?
Yeah, they're for a year with an option for 2 more years.
It's all coming back to me now. Okay, good. And the reason I say good is I'm just, given the very concerted approach that Path takes, I wonder, if, for example, how many folks submitted for the RFP to try to
we had
provide
5
the services?
applicants for the outreach RFP.
I'm sorry?
There was
5
applicants, yeah.
And so what I'm wondering is does it make better sense to take essentially breaking up the city into different sections and have a more concerted, concentrated approach, so as opposed to just having Path focus downtown and maybe have Home First West San Jose, having another one South San Jose, a different organization that can solely focus in on those areas? Is there any value in that?
So I think, the challenge will be resources, right? So we have limited resources. And clearly, we're seeing a better outcome by having this concentrated team downtown. So, the question is, do we have enough outreach workers in order to implement a more concentrated effort? We did change the outreach program this year. So what we have now is we've added a proactive team that will actually begin to focus on some of the creek areas where we're trying to keep those clear from people continuing to re-encamp. And so there is an additional increase in outreach this year, and where we're going to try a different approach.
Yeah, I just, I appreciate, certainly with many things that we discuss up here, a lot of things happen downtown, and I appreciate that. I work downtown, and I see it. But there are also many things, and many I would classify maybe even as hot spots around the city. And there's many in the district that I represent, and I think it's safe to say the current approach probably isn't working as best as it could. And so I'm very much, when these contracts come up from renewal, I'm very much interested in seeing if there's a different approach that we can take and maybe carving out some of the money from and I realize there's not a lot of money, but to the extent it can be supplemented by one of these other pots that are floating around that I'm not fully aware of, I just think we need to try things a little differently. And just to another thing that I wanted to ask you about that really exemplifies this is, for example, the VI SPDAT is the assessment tool that these folks use to get people in the queue, right? The continuum of care.
That is correct.
Right. And so it is really the place where my folks begin getting services. So what I want to understand is, for example, I think Path had a total of 419 people that they interacted with, and all of them got put in the queue. Home First, for example, and I don't have the number in front of me, interacted with X number, only some of them got put in. And so, again, sort of what is happening there? And because I think it seems whatever they're doing seems to be working in my eyes, at least just from these numbers, and I'm going to have a conversation with Home First about it, but I'm just trying to understand sort of why the difference? Why the difference? And
right, and I would say again, because Home First is having to do outreach to a much broader community, and they aren't able to develop the kinds of relationships that Path is able to develop because they are concentrated and focused in one very narrow area. So I think your observation regarding a focused approach is is helpful in terms of seeing how much of a difference that can make in terms of increasing our results. But because we respond to homelessness concerns across the city, we created this outreach team, the home team that's going across the city, just to start those connections and to start outreaching. But I think your observation is well made that that there clearly is a difference when you do something that's concentrated and allows you sufficient time to build those those connections, which is what outreach is trying to do long term.
And I've been out to some of these encampments in my district with some of the outreach workers from Home First, and I know that they're trying to, just as much as we want to get those poor souls off the street, they want to do the same. And I know they're doing as best they can. I really do hope that when this comes back to us, that we really, open our eyes to the possibility of a new model, because I just don't feel like we're capturing as many people as possible. The other question I have, and just two more questions regarding the neighborhood work that's associated with this federal money, and that is, I think some of the recipients are Somos Mayfair, I think, and the folks that they're working with, the collaborative, as well as community university. One thing that stood out to me is I used to be on the board of Somos Mayfair. I know it well. I grew up around there. And community university, I realize they're here by the Five Wounds Bookward Terrace area. Those seem to me to be very place-based sort of nonprofits, right? And rightfully so. I think those areas have some challenges that I think need specific attention, and I think that's wonderful. But what I'm wondering is, the work that these folks are doing with that money, are they able to branch out to other parts of the city and help other neighborhoods, or is this just concentrated in those specific neighborhoods?
So the original vision of those 3 grants that we did to community groups was really based on a place-based neighborhood theory. Right. And we're actually going to be probably moving away from that in the next 5-year plan, and trying to move more strategically, to move with different initiatives or different approaches. So I do know that Somos Mayfair, back to your specific question, is branching out to other community groups to see how they can help with other community groups and potentially help around facilitation and helping to boost their efforts as well. So they've been so successful through their particular grant, and looking at how to do neighborhood engagement, they feel like other groups could learn from their efforts. So they are doing that.
Right. I appreciate that. The reason I ask is I think, I haven't been on the council very long. I'm still a little new, but but the short time that I've been here, what I've realized, and I knew this prior to coming on council, is that oftentimes when we as a city, and I think there's a reason for it, and I appreciate it, but oftentimes when we look at high need areas around the city that need attention, and I grew up in one of those areas, and I appreciate it, we often look to some of the same areas, right? Santee, Poco Way, Mayfair, Cadillac, or maybe not Cadillac, right? But so what I'm concerned about is that there's other areas around the city that, quite frankly, need assistance and need some attention that often don't get it. And my hope is that we try to do it all. I know sometimes that's challenging, meaning that we go into all these different neighborhoods that I saw the look on your face.
Right.
I know we can't do it all.
Because it's a resource issue, right?
Right.
And actually what we have found is there are different neighborhood responses that have popped up in different departments. So you have the police department that's doing a place-based approach. You have PRNS who's doing a place-based approach. Those were in different neighborhoods than what we were doing as well. Yeah. So, and then we have different hotspot areas that are done by other departments as well. So I think we do want to look more comprehensively, like how do we ensure that we're coordinated and that we're not necessarily just focusing all of our resources into one neighborhood. And I think we've tried to do that, and we'll continue to look at how we can do it better.
I appreciate it. One example is Project Hope that came to District 2, but it wasn't naturally going to come to District 2, right? I had to stand up here and advocate for it, which I'm okay with. But if the natural course of things would have taken place, quite frankly, that area wouldn't probably have gotten the attention I think it needs. And so, anyways, there's a lot of neighborhoods around the city that need assistance. The very last question I have is, because last meeting we approved that 1-year contract, is it because we're trying to align it with the renewal of the 5-year? This is going to expire in about a year or two, right? And so, are we trying to align the renewal with
Correct.
this? Is that?
So we will try to align. So after the end of this 5-year period, we're going to start all over again with a new 5-year plan, and that will give us an opportunity to relook at what are the strategies we're implementing and if they're the right ones or not. So we've moved to this 5-year plan. Well, HUD requires it. But we also wanted to do ongoing grants to nonprofits because it was too challenging for them, and it was very disruptive when we used to do 1-year grants and we'd say reapply, because they couldn't depend on that they would continue to get funding, and so it was disruptive and hurt their stability. So we've opted to do these longer term grants to try to make a difference in whatever area we're working on, and when we see that there's potentially an approach that we'd like to try that's new and different, or perhaps we think we could do things better, then we might issue, like we did with outreach, a new RFP in the middle of the 5-year period. So in this case, we wanted to increase our outreach services, and we wanted to hear from the teams to ensure that we were funding the best team for the work that we were wanting to do.
Well, I appreciate all the information. I know some of the questions appear to maybe on the surface to be a little critical, but it's more, I think we're all just trying to get to the core of trying to solve some of these issues. But I appreciate everything you do. I really value it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Menes. And I'm sorry, but the voting for Rookie of the Year actually passed a year ago, so you no longer are eligible. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember, yep.
So I just following along with what Councilmember Camus and Jimenez was asking. It didn't occur to me until they were asking it, but I guess I kind of hear what they're going with in terms of the coordinated efforts between the different organizations throughout the city and then the city's efforts ourselves. When there's a homeless encampment in District 4 and my residents will tell me there are too many of them, we call it homeless concerns, homeless services, and then the city will dispatch people and just offer them services. We can't, move the encampment. We don't do any of that. We just say, would you like services? My sense is the majority of people will decline the services. But assuming that we were somehow able to get them to accept the services, I don't know that with the 5,000 people we were able to touch, if even half of them said, yeah, I'll take a shelter, I'll take services, we would have the capacity to actually serve, 5,000 people, 2,000 people. So
time for public comment.
So I guess my question is, given our resources, to Councilmember Camps's point, does it make more sense to maybe work on actually, building more shelters or more, bridge housing or more wraparound services so that we have the capacity and let the Home First and let the other groups go and do the outreach so they can funnel people into our services?
Well, we're definitely looking at these interim solutions because we know that it's going to take time to build the housing. But again, we're going to have 900 units in the next 2 years or 18 months that will come online, of which a significant number of them are for homeless people, chronically homeless people. So yes, we are looking at interim solutions. And as you know, we've been trying to push forward on our BHCs, and because of neighborhood concerns, it has slowed down our efforts. We are working with the county on the sanctioned encampment to get that up and running and hope that it will be successful as an interim solution. We're coming forward with a pilot safe parking program that you'll be seeing in October. We have $11 million of state funding that we're going to be applying for, and that will be coming forward to you with some solutions on how we deal with the emergency conditions that exist today. So that will be another opportunity for us to look at how can we make the living conditions for people better today as we build the housing.
Thanks, Jackie.
Questions or comments? All right, we have a member of the community who'd like to speak, Ray Perez. We're going to give you a mic here. Just one moment, Ray. There you go.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that.
No
Mr.
worries.
Mayor, good afternoon, everyone in general. Yeah, I really appreciate it for this job, the housing authority for the homeless people. But is looking at the numbers, what my main concern is how much is the percentage of the women. Women, it has a lot of disadvantage because most of the shelters they have is a men's club most of the time. The only one, the biggest one, is Home First and the Little Orchard. They don't have around 100 bunks in anything. Because I see the people around the city, yeah, and to be sincere, some women, they are not in really good shape. It makes me really sad, and the only way I can tell then, when I talk to them, I say, well, just go to the Little Orchard. They have two programs, so for a women and men, they are mixed, yeah. They are a new start, so they can go to the kitchen or they go to the maintenance, so they can get on their feet. But then also, Salvation Army, they're working in the full capacity. I've been there, and also city team, they are working also in full capacity. There was the order, I believe, so the mayor, yeah. But the thing is they're coming a lot of people, different people at the time, coming from from out the states or different counties, from San Francisco, Sacramento, everywhere. Yeah, it's an endless problem. And this is not a problem we come from right now. We can work overnight. And I know, the director of the housing authority is making the best effort in everyone, not only her, everyone. But it's too many people who is coming back and forth. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. I believe it's Valerina herself. Please forgive me. I can't read the writing very well. Valerie? Welcome, Valerie. Come on down.
Thank you for your time. They are not Sam Liccardo down in these places. They get the money, and you're right, there's a detach. I went through this system because I was displaced in a place where the police told me I had to find a safer place to live. They put me through rapid rehousing. Nothing ever happened. I had to go save my own life by finding my own housing. Otherwise, they would have taken all my Social Security money and put me in a terrible place. And they're smoking in there, and they're interacting, and it's a bad environment. And you're right, they don't know what to do with those people. I survived it. I found my own housing. They have me going to court about this. I've yelled at court about this to the attorney down there and the paralegal because they don't care what happens to people in any of these places. The shelters are hugely unsafe. When you're in there, they'll round you up, and they'll put you in a jail cell to make you wait because there are too many people. The sergeant apologizes to you. You can't even get any service or a psychologist. Some 3,500 people because they've got a problem that's, you're exactly right, sir, in what you're saying. It's not getting down to the people. You call PATH, they never return your phone call. You're left in desperation. And then you're accused when you go to court that you're not doing your part. Well, they're going to hear it this time because I was able to find a man who has partial custody of his children, and he loves them, and he takes care of them, and he's a good person. And I'm in that household. And it's very hard for him, and he's an Hispanic man. I don't have anything against the culture, so I'll let you know that up front. If people want to take care of their family, that's great, but there's such an overwhelming problem, you're right, an overwhelming need. And you're left in unsafety in these places. They say they want to help, they're out to make a profit, and then if they put you in these places, they will evict you later. I've got 400 of these places lists that I went through, and I was terribly desperate. And you'll find you'll get evicted if you're in there because there's just no way out. And if you don't have a way out to work, you're going to get really mistreated in the system. That's why they won't respond to outreach because they're afraid. They're afraid that they want to make a profit off of them, that they won't have the right housing, and that they'll get evicted. And many have sadly ended up evicted and back out on the street because they want to make a profit because Mr. Liccardo is doing such a great work with all the other real estate concerns in the city. There are some high-tech individuals that told me they just bought a, the townhouse, and they're doing okay. And that helps the city, and that's very important, and I understand that that's important too. But there are huge pockets of people that are getting neglected, and they're afraid. They're afraid to come out.
Thank you, ma'am.
I just told the police I'm
Thank
very
you.
happy that they've done the policing that they should lately because it's been a nightmare getting through it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, returning to the council, other questions or comments? Okay, let's vote then on Councilman McCamus's motion. All right, thank you, Jackie. Kristen. Item 6.1 is proposed air service support programs. John, Mark are going to tell us about the recent changes at the airport.
Mr. Mayor, Council, John Aiken, Director of Aviation, and with me today is Mark Keel, our Manager of Air Service Development. We wanted to talk today about the Air Service Support Program. We're proposing some changes to the program. Go ahead. So the support program encourages and supports new service to San Jose. It was launched in 2006 by the council. It's been modified a couple times. The last time was in late 2015. It's our recognition of the significant investment that the airlines are putting into San Jose to help them with fee waivers and some marketing assistance. Similar programs are widespread across the U.S. Large airports, small airports, many of them have these kind of programs. Airports are competing aggressively for additional air service. We need to have an active program. This tightening of our program reflects our recent growth, but also our current facility constraints. The last item is for carriers like Volaris that have launched multiple flights less than 3 days a week to different cities, which is still a significant investment by carriers to do 2 days a week to certain cities. So when they add those up to become weekly flights, we'd like to be able to give them these opportunities. Just as a reminder, this chart is kind of what the program is currently, where we do landing fee waivers, we do ticket counter waivers for new entrants, and we have marketing funds for different kinds of flights and for new entrants. The program changes we'd like to do would be first under landing fee waivers for new international outside of North America to leave it only at 18 months. It had a 50% for an additional period. We'd also like to get rid of the ticket counter and gate fee waivers for new entrants because we are gate and ticket counter constricted right now. In fact, we're building new gates to try and fit all the airplanes on. In the marketing funds, we'd like to increase our investment in marketing to both the long-haul domestic, the North American international markets, and take out the new carrier marketing plan. This is to help us market San Jose as a destination and San Jose as a launching point, trying to make sure that our citizens and citizens around the world know that we have these services to get into San Jose. And that's the end of our presentation.
John. All right, questions for the council? I just want to say thank you for all the great work that your team's done, and congratulations on all the success. It's great to see more flights coming, even as we've grown, 50% in passenger growth in just the last, trying to remember, is it 4 years that we've done that? Yeah, it's tremendous. So thank you for everything you've done. Okay, on the motion, let's vote. Great. The next item, which you'll be here for, is the public hearing on new air service support program. No presentation. Any questions? All right, let's vote. And just a quick question, John, when do we expect California Pacific to start flying in San Jose?
November 1st.
Okay, great. All right. We will move on then to item 7.2, which are actions related to the agreement with Hydroscience Engineers for engineering services at the Regional Wastewater Facility. There's no presentation. Is there a motion? Any questions from the council? There are no cards. Let's vote. Item 10.2, I believe we're now on to, no, I'm sorry, 10.1 is the consent calendar. That's where we need to go first. Any request to pull any of those items off of the consent calendar? All right, hearing none. I don't see any cards. Okay. Let's vote on the consent calendar, which is item 10.1. That passes. We're now on to the final item because 10.3 has been deferred. So 10.2 is the amendment to the general plan land use policy relating to the sign code and billboards and electronic displays. Welcome, Rosalind. She will make a presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Rosalind Huey, Director of the Department of Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement. So the item we have before you this afternoon is the item to allow for billboards, electronic billboards, and signage in the downtown. And just by way of overview, this is council priority item number 6. We had received direction from council in December of last year to move forward with this work. And actually, just a reminder that this is actually 2 different programs. First, we were directed to allow electronic, digital, off-site advertising signs or billboards. And then secondly, to create a downtown sign intensification program. So council approved staff's work plan to do this into 2 different phases. Phase 1 is for city-owned sites, which is the item that we have before you this afternoon, and then phase 2 is for non-city-owned sites. Staff also received additional direction from council to consider a 4-to-1 replacement program for the signage and to continue to consult with industry experts as well as to report back to the committee, to the Community Economic Development Committee in the first quarter of this year. So phase 1 includes 3 key items. First, we are deleting the general plan policy that actually prohibits billboards. Number 2, we are revising the City Council policy 6.6-4 on signs on city-owned land, including billboards, programmable electric signs, and signs displaying off-site commercial speech. And then lastly, we are amending sections of the sign code Title 23. So as we undertook this work, we developed several different criteria to analyze all of the sites. And so we looked at sites with appropriate land use designations and zoning districts. We wanted to be sure sites were consistent with the riparian policy, as well as consistent with the historic preservation policies that we have in the city. Also wanted to make sure that the sites were compatible with the existing use that could be on the site. And then lastly, we wanted to ensure that these sites conform to bond financing requirements. So we actually analyzed over 1,000 city-owned sites. And after the analysis, we came down to actually 17 eligible sites. with 22 eligible signs. This includes 8 sites that are outside the downtown and 9 sites with the potential of 14 signs within downtown. And then here are 2 maps. The map on the left is a map showing the locations citywide. The map on the right details sites that are specifically within the downtown area. And also, as you're aware, and this is detailed in the staff memo, there are other limitations to locating billboards on sites, including the State Outdoor Advertising Act. And also, would just like to add that we've done significant outreach with various stakeholders over the last several months. That is also detailed in our memorandum, and we've received feedback from the sign industry, LIC Observatory, and our residents throughout the city. So our recommendation, as directed by City Council last year, is to approve the amendments to the general plan, the City Council Policy 6-4, and the sign code. We do want to highlight that we took this item to the Planning Commission on August 22nd, and they actually recommended that the City Council lift the billboard ban on city-owned sites only, and to not undertake phase 2 for non-city-owned sites. And a couple of the commissioners actually share concerns about pedestrian and roadway safety, as well as visual impacts of billboards and signs. So with that, that concludes staff presentation. We are available to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. We have several members of the public who'd like to speak. Kathy Bradley, followed by Ryan Brooks, Bruce Qualls, and Raja Guhartha Thurka. Please forgive me for mispronouncing your name, Raja.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Bradley, and I am the real estate manager at VTA. I'm here to speak on behalf of my agency. So VTA requests that the city include in its amendment to the ordinance, general plan, and policy, city-owned properties and also city-controlled properties. That will allow for the city and VTA to continue its decades-long advertising partnership model. As many of you know, for over 20 years, VTA and the city have shared bus shelter ad revenue, and we can do that with digital ad revenue as well. VTA has actually identified at least 2 sites that are viable for digital advertising and that do not conflict with any of the city-identified sites. Partnering with VTA will benefit the city in the following ways. First, it will add substantial revenue to the city, upwards of $1 million. 2, it will reduce blight in neighborhoods by allowing VTA to eliminate existing old neighborhood billboards and replacing them with new freeway-adjacent digital signage. We have about 10 of those throughout the city. And 3rd, it will apply VTA's strict advertising policy to any content at these sites. For VTA, the revenue would help reduce potential transit reductions as VTA deals with a significant shortfall in revenue. And so for these reasons, VTA requests that the ordinance, general plan, and policy be amended to include city-controlled properties, which would be defined to include sites under agreement with the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Ryan Brooks, and I am the Executive Vice President of Outfront Media. I'm also here representing All Vision, Foster Interstate. We support this council amendment. You know, I have the opportunity in my role, I oversee all the government affairs for Outfront for the US and Canada. You know, one thing I do like about this proposal is you can tell the staff put their work, some hard work into this, because this plan right here covers what we call best practices in the industry. You have a takedown ratio, which is something that happens throughout the nation in these types of ordinances. You also have the ability to raise the revenue without raising taxes, and hopefully have us move into the 21st century. We also, during the RFP process, we're hoping that this board allows us to propose sites, alternative sites that's not on the list. There are 8 sites that are outside the city. And through our own research, we found out that 6 of those 8 sites are sites where we cannot build a sign because of state law, and someone mentioned the Outdoor Advertising Act. What we're hoping to do is to allow us to propose alternative sites out there in which the staff, the council member, can either accept or reject while maintaining the purpose of this ordinance change. I also want to thank Councilmember Perez, Arenas, Rocha, and Jones for the memo they wrote. We believe in all the aspects of that memo because once again, we believe this is in hand with best practices of the city. And also want to thank Lick Observatory. They've been actually fantastic partners with us. We've sat down, we compromised, and we're in, I believe, agreement with moving forward. And last, we believe that the non-advertising time from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. is a doable time for us. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Qualls?
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council members. I'm Bruce Qualls. I'm with Clear Channel Outdoor. I'm in charge of real estate and public affairs here for Northern California. Wanted to extend our appreciation to staff and Planning Director Huey on just sort of an extraordinarily detailed analysis that's been done on this. In our experience, I've not seen a more thorough analysis before a policy was enacted. You know, we typically go to an individual site, do a thorough initial study on that after the policy's in place, and then find out whether or not there's anything that's incumbent at that particular location that adversely impacts it. And so I've never seen anything quite so extensive as this. And, you know, I appreciate that. We've worked closely along with the other folks in our industry to help make sure that we've conveyed the information necessary to make this analysis thorough and proper. And it, you know, it's been collaborative and exhaustive. We urge you to support what had been the original recommendation, both for the downtown sites and the citywide sites. We think that's the best opportunity for the city to both reduce the number of signs within the community, drive revenue, and then create the sort of the sizzle that we've talked about for the downtown development. Now, we respect the concerns that are expressed by some about that, but we feel that it's not that complex of an industry, and we think with the individual studies on the individual sites that we can ameliorate any of the concerns that are out there, or those sites can be rejected by Planning Commission or Council. If desired, the city may well do a two-staged process for this. You may do an RFP on the city-owned sites outside of the downtown zone and the downtown zone. Either way, whatever is your preference is fine with us. And again, we're confident that we can work closely with staff, very capable staff, to move this ahead in a positive way over a short time frame where it won't adversely impact any other goals of the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Raja, welcome. Raja is Mayor Chuck Reed, followed by Ben Roschke.
Is this working? Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for taking a brave attempt on my last name. That's not easy. And thank you, council members.
I'm going to get it right, I promise.
Thank you. So I'm here on behalf of Lake Observatory, which is proud to be celebrating its 130th year. It's been on the mountain since 1888. And for 2 decades, I've been the lighting liaison for the observatory with the city of San Jose. And we've enjoyed a wonderful collaboration, as was stated earlier. Enjoyed a wonderful collaboration with the city of San Jose and with other stakeholders, lighting companies and citizens, to ensure that the lighting in the city of San Jose is responsible. And we've actually set this collaboration between San Jose and Lake has set the standard for other cities around the country and around the world. And cities that come to mind are Tucson, with its observatories near it, Kona and Hilo, with its observatories around it, and so on. Even cities that are not close to astronomical observatories have followed this lead for responsible lighting. Responsible lighting has meant lighting that is functional in serving the needs of its citizens, safety of its citizens, well-being of its citizens. It's effective in terms of advertising, in terms of the city's revenue, effective in terms of minimizing the power usage, while also protecting dark skies to allow astronomical research to continue, while inspiring young people to look up at the heavens and be inspired by STEM. So Lake is not just a historical site, It's an active research site. It's one of the world-leading observatories in research. And again, I applaud the city for this wonderful collaboration, and I hope we can continue to set a standard for the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back to City Hall, Mayor Chuck Reed.
We still have audio problems from time to time. Some things are eternal, I guess. I represent Orange Barrel Media, which is a company that has probably more experience than any other media company in the country at working in downtown environments to build out creative digital signs in a program that supports the arts and the culture and the economic development goals of the cities. In many cities across the country, including Denver, that some of you got to visit and see what they're doing in their arts zone in downtown Denver. Orange Barrel Media thinks that we can do the same thing here in San Jose, and I invite your attention to a letter submitted for the record by Chris Green, the managing director, describing the reasons for structuring your RFP process in a way that maximizes the ability to get a creative, innovative, interesting downtown zone and maximizing the revenues for the city. And that is two factors. The first is you probably should do separate RFPs for the citywide and the downtown zone because they're really two different kinds of objectives for the city. And if you want to maximize the revenues out of the downtown zone, you want to encourage the most bidders, the most creative people to want to bid. The second thing is not to require or allow points for a takedown in the downtown zone because there are only a few companies that actually have billboards in San Jose, and requiring a takedown then makes it much more difficult for companies like Orange Barrel Media, that's not a billboard company and doesn't own any billboards throughout the city, to be able to bid on what the city would like to have done in downtown. So I commend that letter to you. Chris Green describes it better than I do, but it's really about maximizing revenues and maximizing the impact of what you're trying to do in downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Roschke. Forgive me if I mispronounced that.
Everybody does. Ben Roschke with Team San Jose.
Thank you, Ben.
Mayor. Thank you, fellow council members. On behalf of Team San Jose as the CVB, having seen the effect this can have on Denver in terms of enlivening downtown for visitors and placemaking, we're very supportive of the proposed changes that are coming up here. We do want to stress, though, as the manager of the convention center and the CPA, that we currently use the Barco at the CPA for promotion of events within that facility. It's a key marketing driver for the promoters and arts partners that come through and utilize that facility. Likewise, at the convention center, as we've expanded and brought in more and more high-tech clients, we see they're very concerned with the potential for conflicting or competing interests to buy out advertising. We've had to sell out all the available advertising under our control within those facilities, and have had competing companies buying out pedicabs and the like while we have large conventions in town. So we're very supportive of the changes, but ask that as we move forward, we keep in mind the needs of the users within some of those publicly owned downtown facilities, so that we can help to maintain a competitive advantage against other destinations and attracting these high-tech companies and more arts into the downtown. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, returning to the council. I know there's several issues before us, but I wanted to ask a few questions about the differences here between phase 1 and phase 2. Rick, as I understand it, what we started with was a concept of seeing how we could utilize signage, electronic signage in the downtown, both to increase the vibrancy of our streetscape as well as to generate revenue to help the city in the same way that Denver was using, for example, for its sign district and promoting the arts and beautification and so forth. And so the question is, I know that in phase 1, clearly that's city-owned sites and we can charge a lease rate and generate revenue. With regard to phase 2, sites owned by private parties or parties other than the city, can the city actually generate any money?
The short answer is no, other than regulatory fees and fees it takes to, in terms of approvals. That's part of it is the phase one design is not just revenue in terms of giving the city the ability on its own properties to raise money, but to have some limitations on the billboard, the number of billboards, at least at this point, and then seeing where it goes. But the short answer to your question is not other than collecting some kind of fees. Now, I'm not familiar with the Denver program. I didn't attend the time I went to Denver. I had a tour of the cannabis facility, so I didn't get a chance to do anything else. But we're open to looking at things like that, but I just don't know how we do that at this point.
So then for any privately owned parcel, the city doesn't own it. All we can charge is essentially a full cost recovery fee. That is, whatever it costs us to provide the service of a permit, that is all we can charge. Is that right?
Right. We don't have the property interest. We just have a regulatory interest, and that's all we can charge.
Okay. I also wanted to ask a bit about the community outreach, because I know we're just focusing on phase one here initially in this outreach and the 17 sites or so. There were 2 community meetings, I believe, in October of last year. Could you give me a sense where, first, did you see many neighborhood leaders, community members at those meetings? I looked at what it said in the staff report, but what I saw was a sign company representative who made some observations, and I didn't hear what I would typically hear whenever we're at neighborhood meetings and people are talking about billboards in their communities.
Thank you, Mayor. So yes, city staff did conduct 2 community meetings in October of last year, and we have staff who actually are here who can perhaps address the question specifically. I am aware that there wasn't significant community attendance, but there were some residents who showed up to share their concerns about adding billboards to neighborhoods. So either Jenny or Leah? Jenny, I know, was at the meeting.
Yes, there were some neighborhood leaders at the community meetings that expressed concerns about brightness of signs and distraction from signs while circulating through the neighborhoods or driving on streets. On the other hand, there were also some community members that appreciated kind of the bright lights, big city effect that you get in major international cities. There were people who had recently relocated from Singapore and appreciated the atmosphere of downtown that had bright signs. Those were shut off, I believe, at 11 p.m. or midnight. So they saw the value of limiting the brightness after a certain amount of time. Other concerns raised were from environmental groups relating to effect on habitat of riparian corridors and effects on wildlife. Those were some of the themes. There weren't a lot of community members that came out. We've had several meetings over the years that didn't just cover programmable electronic signs, but also super graphics, and I think we got more interest on the super graphics. And Blage, you were at some of these community meetings too, so if you want to add anything.
Good afternoon, Blage Zlalic, downtown manager. So yes, I think it's fair to say that there was not a significant outpouring of residents at the meetings that we held specifically downtown. I did not go to the ones that were not in downtown. We did have a pretty good showing of downtown residents at these meetings. We did have a good showing. We met individually with some of the stakeholder groups that we were talking about these kind of large-scale, large format signs for downtown. And as Jenny said, we also had the specific focus groups with the environmental folks, the
Right.
historic preservation folks.
Yeah, I guess and I appreciate, you've already had a lot of meetings with a lot of folks. I appreciate that it is hard when you're talking about potentially a citywide policy for people to get particularly energized if they don't know whether or not there's a billboard going up in their own neighborhood. And I guess I just want to understand better the extent of outreach to help people understand what this was about. How did that happen? Just by email? I mean, I assume you're doing outreach on the citywide aspect of it, not just on downtown, is that right?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lisa Velakis, the new ordinance supervisor. Jenny was the supervisor during the original meetings. Our outreach, we had a list of interested parties that we knew would be interested in certain aspects of signs, the environmental activists who are concerned about light shed on sensitive riparian, historic, the individuals who typically participate in discussions around historic issues, so signs, how would they affect historic districts? We reached out to them via email. We knew who our players were in the sign industry, and we just emailed them. We posted a notice on the website. It's also published. This hearing was published, so it's typical outreach for.
Yeah, I guess here's where I'm going. I get it that preservationists, environmentalists who are particularly engaged were specifically reached out to, and I appreciate that. My experience of being on the General Plan Task Force, and my experience generally in community conversations around signage and billboards, is that if there had been significant amount of communication with neighborhood leaders, we'd be seeing a whole lot of folks here expressing concerns about billboards in their neighborhood. And I didn't see that from the community meetings, and I don't see it today. And I don't know, it sounds as though there has not been, based on what I'm hearing, a lot of sort of generalized outreach, that is by email to all the neighborhood leaders, for example, who typically are on the planning department list, to actually let them know, hey, we're going to talk about signs potentially in your community. Is that fair?
I would say at the time the meeting notices went out, we didn't know where the signs would be. So when someone gets notified about, sign change in the city, without knowing that's in their neighborhood specifically, even if maybe we directly emailed those neighborhood groups, they may not necessarily participate in a conversation that there may never be a sign there. They're theoretical signs for a program that we didn't know what it looked like at the time. We really didn't have these sites until probably March of this year.
Yeah, fair point. So I guess where I'm going with all this is this. Appreciate the input that we've had from the industry representatives, from individuals who are uniquely concerned about light, for example, at Lick Observatory or in the watersheds. My concern is the notion that we're just going to jump into phase 2 without really having community members particularly well engaged on this issue, because I have a feeling we could spin our wheels spending a lot of time in a lot of community meetings and very long hearings here, jumping into something like that before we actually understand what the reaction is to what we're trying to do just in the downtown core, where the expectations I think we'd all expect are much more permissive around signage and so forth. And so I'm really concerned about the approach that says, let's jump right into phase 2 when we don't even know how it's working out with phase 1 yet. And I'm also concerned because I think phase 2 really incorporates an approach that goes well beyond the original intent of our mandate when we got this ball rolling, which was, how can we create essentially a sign district in downtown that will generate revenues for the city? And we're not going to generate those revenues from private sector participants who are only going to be paying whatever fee is necessary for a permit. And so my memorandum reflects sort of a walk before you run approach that I think is also reflected in the Planning Commission's direction. That is that we are going to learn a lot when we roll out the first few signs, and it's not a bad idea for us to do a lot of listening before we rush ahead. I am also particularly concerned that because this involves aesthetics in parts of our city where there will likely be a lot of community engagement and need for that, we've got a very small planning staff that is already overworked with a very heavy load in terms of priorities right now. North San Jose, we are still hoping will be able to be a place where we can actually build housing. And we've been trying to get that rolling for 3 years. We've got a planning staff that is being pulled in a lot of directions, getting a downtown EIR finished, we hope. We're going to be going into a general plan review year next year. We've got all the housing-focused initiatives as we're trying to get more housing built. And this is going to be an enormous distraction in terms of time. We've already seen for this very modest step of just focusing on the downtown, we've now had 6 focus groups, is that right? Community meetings of some sort.
Yes, Mayor. So we've actually had 9 different community groups or focus group meetings with the community.
Right. Thank you, Rosalind. So this has the ability to really gum up the works for all the things we're trying to accomplish here with, again, a very thinly staffed planning team. In addition to all the housing general plan, North San Jose, all the other needs we have, we also have some pretty big projects here in the downtown and elsewhere that we're trying to get over the goal line. So I think this is simply not a priority for us to move on to phase 2. Let's take a breath, let's get phase 1 done, and then let's understand what the impacts are with the benefit, at least in phase 1, that we know there will be revenue, there'll be generating some public benefit that we can readily identify, whether we choose ultimately that those dollars would be used for the arts or for beautification in the downtown or elsewhere. It seems like that is time well spent. I'm very concerned about us moving on to the next phase. Okay, to the council, Councilmember Perales.
Hello. Okay. Thank you. I just want to, well, first off, thank you, staff. I know there was a lot of work that was put into this. This has been a long time coming, certainly something I've been very interested in. And I want to correct the record a little bit, Mayor, in regards to the statement you made a couple times. I actually, through my office, submitted the first memo along the lines of a sign code update October 5th, 2015. And it did end up going through prioritization. The same priority process that it went through, there was an additional downtown sign district item along with it, but as a separate priority item. And the sign code update actually passed, titled Electronic Billboards, as don't know exactly what priority it was, but I think the last time it was ranked 6th. The downtown sign district item actually did not pass priority. But a few months later, during the budget process, there was a budget allocation to include the work of a downtown sign district into the work of the sign code update, which had been prioritized. So actually, kind of au contraire, Mayor, the task and the priority that's been set out has actually always been for a sign code update citywide. And in addition to, it wasn't even prioritized for the downtown sign district, albeit I voted on that item, I did support it. It didn't even get prioritized. It got included through a budget process and added into the work. And now sort of fast forward a couple years, and indeed it's not even the item that was prioritized as number 6 that we're talking about completing. Yourself, you're actually talking about maybe delaying that work even further. And I, hence in my memo, the last item is kind of urging us to that phase 2, as I had all along hoped that we could do it combined as a package rather than separate it out. But I ultimately understood, and in conversations with staff, was an agreement to this phased approach. And staff knows that that was a little bit of reluctance on my part to support that, but ultimately supported that work. And here we are. So we're completed with phase one, which ultimately was that focused on sort of city-owned and a focus on a downtown sign district. And with phase two, now work to begin. And so I think there's certainly excitement and some agreement upon what has already been completed in phase one. But I would say we are nowhere near completing the council priority, the actual directive, the priority that the council voted on. And that will be complete once we can actually get into phase two. Albeit, I do understand some of the concerns about, obviously, citywide and wanting to have the right stakeholders introduced into the conversation. And so I actually wanted to see if staff could answer that. You know, with phase two, here's the outreach that you already did, which is up on our screen. Were we planning on doing more outreach citywide? And if we weren't, is that not something that we can incorporate?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. Yes, for phase two, we had planned to do additional community outreach. You know, the main component for phase two is preparing of the EIR document, and that will take some time. But obviously, since we're going citywide for phase two, we would be doing continued community outreach.
Okay, so similar to, I mean, outreach that we've done here, but more of a focus, obviously, city-owned sites in downtown. We can feel confident as a council that our communities out in the broader area of outside of downtown, we will invite them in, as the mayor was pointing out, through whatever it may be, channels of ourselves, through email, but making sure that our communities are brought in, because if there are concerns that we're not hearing today, but there's concerns that maybe they may arise later, we obviously don't want to miss those. And so, what I'm understanding, and I feel confident that we can do that. We can do that in this phase two process, and that's something that staff was planning on doing. So I'm not as concerned in that regard, in regards to what the feedback would be, because I don't know till we actually go out there and do it. And I can't say that, you know, we're not going to have tremendous community opposition or not, and ultimately what even my own decision may be because of that. I certainly support it today, and I support continuing the work. But sure, there may be a change of heart or direction based on what we hear back from our community if we go out to this phase two. So in regards to, you know, other opportunities around that, I think there are some, and we can talk a little bit about that. But the mayor pointed out, obviously, certainly on city-owned property, much more revenue to be made. I think we've known and we've had an interest in how can also the city utilize the sites as we go into phase two. But more importantly, I think one of the ones that's also come up with the community is the takedowns of these older, at times blighted, in awkward locations of older signs. And I think that's obviously another opportunity that we can't forget that we have when we move into phase two that continues to expand that. I do want to get into a couple of questions though in regards to, I put out a memo with a couple of my colleagues. I want to make one clarifying point and ask some questions around it, because we sort of dive into a couple of changes there from what staff's recommendation was. So first off, in regards to the RFP itself, what is our timeline on getting the RFP back to council for approval?
I'm going to let Blage answer that question. She's going to be leading that from OED.
Thanks, Rosalind. So we don't have a definitive timeline set out at this point, but we do have some kind of general ideas, and our goal would be to come back to the council with kind of parameters of the RFP, probably mid to late February.
Okay, thank you. Certainly, again, you know, it's kind of been a long time coming, so I'm looking forward to that work completing. In one of my recommendations, I recommended sort of maybe a point system, which I may be recommending pulling that out, but I want to see if staff can speak to why within your recommendation there should not be an implementation of a takedown requirement for the downtown sign intensification zone, which I do support, but I wanted to see if you can speak to that. There's not a requirement for that. So and just clarify that, and then speak to maybe why we recommended that.
Sure. I mean, so I think one of the points that's been brought up is that there are only currently 2 media companies that actually would be able to be eligible to put forward the ability to take down. And so the thinking is that if you've only got 2 companies, there are more than 2 companies that we know of already that potentially are interested in proposing, and that potentially gives them, you know, a little bit more of an advantage than the 5 or 6 or 7 other companies that would be interested in participating. So I think we're just trying to keep it as level a playing field as possible, but certainly that's at the council's discretion to give us direction one way or the other. But the idea would be to try to keep it as level a playing field as possible.
Okay, and that does help. And my thought was as well was is there a midway point, which is where I considered maybe a point system, which would be for maybe the two owners of sort of have signs within the downtown intensification zone, or others that have signs, and if they're going to be willing to take them down, could they then be added points? But I think it may be even too or much more confusing. And so if we stick with the staff recommendation, so when I move my memo, I will eliminate, I think it's recommendation number 5, but I'll make that in the motion. One of the things that did come up, and I was interested about, and I appreciate our representative from the Lick Observatory that came out. Thank you for coming, and I urged the industry experts that have been meeting with us to go and speak with representatives of the Lick Observatory, recognizing that's a big reason as to why anything that we do around lighting in the city of San Jose, hence our old amber lights that we're finally beginning to change out to LEDs, and anything that we do though in lighting has an effect on the observatory. And so I wanted to see if staff could speak to, and if not, then maybe we can invite one of the industry experts, or even actually ask our representative from the LIC. Can you speak to how those conversations went? What in regards to an outcome? What I understood was a positive outcome in a conversation with the experts and LIC Observatory staff.
Thank you. I think the conversations between the industry and the LIC representatives went really well. They collaborated on items that there were alternatives to. For example, the 15-degree tilt. The LIC observatory representatives agreed that they could support alternative methods that it could achieve the same light attenuation. Related to the brightness issue, there wasn't as easy of a change to the environmental document that may or may not achieve that same objective. So if it's either white and bright, it wasn't as easy to say, or some alternative, because there's not an alternative necessarily to white. So it's not a prescriptive thing that we have to have. It just says we don't prohibit a white or bright background. We would like to restrict it. Restrict is not qualified. So I think in their discussion with the observatory at our meeting, they seemed amenable to trying to limit white and brightness where they could by changing out different ads, maybe not having all bright ads at the same time, in succession. So I think the discussions went well, and we changed the part of the environmental document that we could to still not have to recirculate it
Okay, thank you. And one of the things that I learned about, which I did not know, was that you can actually have tilted LED lights rather than a tilted billboard, which I was not aware of. And so that just different technologies that you can use on a billboard to adjust the lighting rather than the actual billboard itself. And so I have added that into my memoranda on item 4 in regards to looking at some of the light restrictions that, and as well changing that restriction itself to a guidance similar to what you're talking about, but making it actually a guidance, and then allowing for the technology rather than, say, requiring a tilt of the billboard. If the technology, if the installer of it is going to be willing to install the proper technology that can tilt the LED lights, then that may be the mitigation necessary, and to allow for that to be the case. And so that's the that was the understanding of mine, and that was why I added in number 4. Let me get to my last question here. So we also added in my memo around our Vision Zero, and I wanted to just see, there were concerns about pedestrian bicycle safety, and I'm wondering what are staff's thoughts and whether we think there'll be any impacts or not.
So staff is supportive of, so the Vision Zero strategy really aims to eliminate traffic fatalities, and doing that through methods either, in the toolbox that could improve conditions, or through policy. So with these billboards would be more of not a
hard change that we can make to implement Vision Zero. It would be more of a policy. So when we cite billboards, we want to make sure that they're in locations where drivers aren't right at an intersection and they're trying to assess a situation, all the things that they have to assess. So a policy related to billboards would be make sure that they're mid-block, or make sure they're not in the way of lines of sight, to make sure that they follow state and federal guidelines, which limits flashing, which limit videos. They require a certain length of messages that they believe aid in driver attention, whatever it takes, the length of time, what the state has determined is an appropriate length of time to minimize driver distraction. So we're incorporating all of those things into our policy and code, and those all support the Vision Zero policy component. They're not necessarily physical things we can do to the environment to aid in that, but they're more the policy items.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate that and the response on that, and hope that there aren't any issues that occur, and then if indeed there ultimately are issues around with accidents in and around some of the new digital boards or signage, that we can evaluate those properly to see if the signage did play a part. And I know that Shiloh Ballard is here. You did not speak, but if you had an item to add in regards to this, I'd welcome you to come down. If not, hopefully we've addressed a lot of those concerns. Thank you. The thumbs up is it's rewarding. So I would like to then move my memoranda signed with my colleagues, Councilmember Arenas, Rocha, and Jones, and eliminating item, I think it's item 5. So eliminating that additional points recommendation. And that's the motion. Thank you.
It comes on. Yeah. Councilmember, I want to note something, and I'll ask planning staff to chime in to the extent they want to chime in as well. Your memo, there are some CEQA issues. The current neg deck that's before you gives clearance for 17 sites. It doesn't give clearance for any additional or substitute sites, and so you can direct staff to look at others and come back, but for purposes of this one, I think that's probably the limitation on any direction, as opposed to we're going to, because we've not identified or done the CEQA analysis on that. Similarly, in number 2, the right-of-way, expanding the definition. I'm happy to work with the VTA. I think this has been their concern. I think we mentioned that there is an agreement, but that's something that I'd like direction to work with them and then come back on. But the CEQA clearance gives gives it only for the 17 sites, and then for A and C, the tilt requirement. Again, and this is I'm out of my element on this one in terms of the lighting and the issues. I know there's an issue with respect to the Lick Observatory, but what the CEQA clearance gives is the current requirement is defined, and then the hours of operation, I think it's 12 and 6, and not a 12 and 5, so that would require additional analysis. So my concern is that you have a neg deck before you, and that's the environmental clearance, and if we were to add these things, we would have to go back and redo it. And again, you can direct staff to come back with this at a later date, but I'd recommend we move forward with the program and then give nothing but direction to look at this and come back at a future date if the council wants to do that.
So it sounds like I have 2 options. One is to take what staff has presented and then allow that to move forward, maybe come back at a later date to then amend it. Or I guess it would be a delay in the process because it would then, some of these changes would then trigger additional staff work on CEQA.
Right, we'd have to go back out, do another initial study, and the 21-day, if it is a neg deck, a 21-day period, and so it would be deferred.
Although I don't want to do that, I think that's what I would recommend because quite honestly, I think these are important to have within and prior to issuing this first RFP. And I think, and I'll speak to a couple of them. So the timing, I understand, is not unfamiliar to other cities for that 5 a.m. And there's obviously a huge amount of commuters that happen or that are driving between the prior to the 6 a.m. hour. And so that's one of the reasons why, in regards to getting the message on, actually making these sites more viable and then ultimately more profitable. Certainly the city-owned land or city right-of-way, and the remnant property, if that indeed requires additional CEQA work, I think it's worth it, because that's not something that we included in the initial look that staff did and the sites that they looked at, but I think they should have. And then in number one, I think we've heard from industry, myself at least, I don't know if any of my colleagues, but we've heard from the industry experts that are stating that we did not evaluate every opportunity that they themselves have been out there, obviously proactively trying to see if there were additional sites, even on city-owned land, that we may have missed. And this would just allow an opportunity for them to propose those sites through the RFP process. And if what you're saying, Rick, is that they'd have to propose those ahead of time and then obviously allow us to complete the CEQA process before the RFP, then so be it. I think this is certainly a conversation I had with staff. We were attempting to get the industry experts to connect with staff ahead of time to propose some of these sites, to talk about the inclusion through the committee. We obviously directed staff to work with the industry experts in evaluating some of these sites. And what we know we do have is a pretty narrow, and I know we had one industry expert coming up and speaking to the point of, out of the 17 sites, it's sort of narrowed down to just a small handful when you actually look at what is viable and what is allowable by law. So this could open that up prior to us releasing the RFP. What is the timing delay that we think it would take to include those recommendations of mine that Rick just pointed to?
So, Councilmember, as we previously shared, so our existing environmental document clears the 17 sites that we've presented to you this afternoon. So if we would want to add sites, that means doing additional environmental clearance. I mean, it may take us into another type of environmental clearance than what we currently have now. You know, it could be months, several months, right? That's why, as we undertook this work, we made it very clear that phase one would be for city-owned. We've come up with these 17 sites, and I would also remind the council that these 17 sites are actually included in the amended City Council Policy 6-4. So these 17 sites are in the policy. In order to add sites, not only would we have to do additional environmental work, but then the City Council would also have to amend City Council Policy 6-4. So in essence, our approach and the direction that we had received was phase one for city-owned sites. We have come up with these 17 sites that are eligible, and then for phase two, we could look at any additional sites. And when we met with the industry representatives, they did share that they had additional city-owned sites that they thought would be eligible, and we said we'd be glad to include them, and we can still include them should the council direct us to go to phase two. Again, in phase two, we can look at additional sites, we can look at the non-city-owned sites, and that would require the full EIR. So that was the approach.
I just want to reiterate, I think, our initial take on the environmental analysis could put us in an EIR territory. So phase one becomes phase two. So when you have phase two, you would be looking at what's in this memo that's been added and the non-city-owned site. So I guess if you want to move forward rather quickly and with phase one and not delay it for a year or so, we would recommend staying with staff's recommendation on the scope of phase one.
The major definition of the scope of phase one and phase two was city-owned and non-city-owned. And I'm not talking about going outside of that. This is still city-owned sites. It's just saying sites that industry experts are thinking we missed and that they want an opportunity to suggest what they may be. And then additionally, and we've had this conversation right often where it's the sites that are in our control or like our right of way. Granted, that one was sort of bouncing back and forth between should we do that phase two or not, because it's not, it's certainly city owned, it's our right of way. And recognizing, yes, VTA has certainly been an interested partner along the whole way. can we get a best case scenario in regards to, we this time around we did a SQL analysis and we got a neg deck. What is the best case scenario if we think there's only maybe a handful of industry proposed sites that come in, and out of them, right, we have to evaluate. And I don't know if this 6 a.m. to 5 a.m. is going to make a huge difference. And I also don't know if this tilt of the billboard versus tilt of the LED is going to make a huge difference on a SQL analysis for achieving a neg deck. What's a best case scenario that we can actually get that done prior to this?
So I'm going to let Jenny Nussbaum from our environmental team talk about timeframes, potential timeframes.
Yeah, going from 6 a.m. to 5 a.m. is actually a big change, and it's also proposing hours that are more liberal than what we allow for signage that is on premise, that is programmable electronic. So we would need technical studies. It would likely be an environmental impact report, because we don't really have, as far as I know, a way to go from a negative declaration to a mitigated negative declaration for rulemaking. So I would say it would add approximately 9 months to 18 months, depending on how controversial the proposal is and what kind of technical studies have to occur.
And what is the estimated timeline on a phase 2? Is it around the same time?
Yes, because phase 2 is an EIR, and so we would look at everything.
And so staff suggestion is, or would be, to fold in my recommendations of this substitute sites being proposed by the industry, and additionally this 4A and 4B, 4C to fold that into phase 2, and that's possible that could then affect. Now, here's my concern, right? We do an RFP, and it's staff's current language. We go to phase 2, and we amend it, and we start to add in some of these modifications like the tilt and the lighting, and right, and now how does that affect, right? So for the industry is responding to the first RFP, they're responding based on more narrow, guidelines, right? And so not necessarily being able to maybe respond the best way that they possibly could if they would know 9 or 18 months later, the door would open slightly more. Is that correct? I mean, it's right. They'd be responding to the current RFP language based on those parameters. So I'm not even exuding frustration, but I hope you can sense it, because it's
Councilmember, if I can just chime in, I think it may depend on of how your RFP is structured, and it would give you the ability to amend, assuming the program. Let's just assume we do a phase 2 and come back in 2 years, that there may be an ability, depending on how the RFP is structured, to do any kind of amendments at a later date, and you'd have the environmental clearance for it. So you just sort of give yourself that option in the RFP.
So you think there's a legal way in the RFP that we can address that?
It's possible, yeah. We would try to craft something. The RFP is a different type of document.
And staff thinks that's possible too.
I mean, we have direction to come back to the council with the RFP before it goes out. So at that point, we can, depending on what you do here today, we can incorporate some adjustment to the RFP and present that to you, and then you can determine if that's the appropriate course of action. I do want to mention, though, that 4A is actually modified in the current, there is an alternate tilt requirement, or there's an alternate that can be proposed to the tilt requirement. So that, in essence, has been done already. So it's B and C that would need to be updated.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we have been, again, going down this hole for quite a while, since 2015, and sort of come back a couple times, and I think we've even had some tough conversations in committee, and to hear that it may not have been, I don't know how, but the message may not have been received the way that we had intended to by the council, in regards to hoping that we could work with our partners out there to add in what we felt was sufficient for this first phase, knowing that this was the first bite at the apple. and to hear back repeatedly from the industry experts that we're narrowing ourselves down with these now 17 sites that, a handful of them, actually the majority of them, potentially are unusable sites. And so if, and that ultimately there may be some other sites that could have been proposed if we had already allowed that information to come in, rather than me having to put it here in an additional memo that then could delay the process another 9 to 18 months. Certainly that's not something I want to do, and especially considering that's maybe how long phase 2 would take anyways. It doesn't feel like I have an option at all. It feels like, well, this is kind of where we're stuck at, and we're stuck with this language prior to an RFP, and the additional elements that we've already, again, heard from the people that were going to be responding to this RFP are not going to help us through the process. And so I will maintain the motion as is. I'll allow my colleagues to chime in and see if there's, and allow myself obviously to hear some of that comment, and then see if there's an amendment that we can get to and something that might we can agree on.
Councilmember, if I could add, so for most of this calendar year, we have been meeting with the sign companies pretty regularly. They had shared with us earlier on that they thought that there were additional sites, city-owned sites that could be included, and we actually, met with them and asked for those sites so we could include them before releasing the EIR document, before it was circulated, so that we would have the potential to actually include those in phase 1. But unfortunately, we didn't get specific information on what those additional sites could be. Otherwise, we would have had the opportunity to include them in the EIR document that was circulated.
All right, Councilmember Rocha.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Perales covered a number of my questions. I'm going to try and be brief given the time on this issue. But in terms of the work that you mentioned we've done in 2018 since our last meeting, and then there was, I think, a early meeting in 2018 on the CED committee as well. But what work has come out of this work during 2018? Like the document, the ordinance itself, and I'm going back and looking at that here. But I'm trying to get a sense of what have we done in 2018 that's put us in a position to go forward. So if you could fill me in, and I'm not trying to do a gotcha, but I've been following this issue now since 2015 as well, and I keep at each point been asking, what have we done since the last meeting? And oftentimes we're left with some frustration, and I'm sure you as well.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, so we last provided a verbal update to the CED committee in March of this year. So what staff has been focused on for all of this calendar year is actually doing the analysis. So we actually went through and applied the criteria to over 1,000 sites, city-owned sites in the city, and that was significant staff work. We coordinated with the Office of Economic Development, and so that has really been our work program for most of this calendar year. In addition to that, we prepared the environmental document, and that was circulated for the required public comment period. So doing the evaluation of the sites, completing the environmental document, circulating that document, and responding to those comments, that has been our work for 2018.
Okay, thank you. And I was actually thinking when you were responding to Councilmember Perales around the CEQA additional work and the scope that he's talked about. I was under the impression, hearing from industry folks, maybe it was 2018 or 2017, that CEQA work can be done on a project-by-project basis by the folks in the industry. Is that accurate? Or maybe that's a question for Rick.
Well, the way this policy is structured, you've identified 17 sites. And so you're saying that you can do this on these sites. If you have alternative sites, you should be looking at the alternative sites or whatever may be an alternative site when you adopt the policy and adopt the program. And I think it's more difficult to say each time that somebody comes in and says, okay, we got something else we're going to do. I'm concerned about a piecemeal argument. And I just think we need to, you know, this program is structured to move forward with these identified sites. And if you want a broader analysis on different sites, then we need to do that work.
So to clarify, what I was thinking is if someone in the industry found a site, submitted it as a site, of course it'd have to go into the full RFP, but with the acknowledgement that that site, if anybody bids on it, would be required to do the CEQA work themselves.
Well, I think the idea is in the RFP process, before you do that, you have CEQA clearance on all the possible sites, whether they're these or alternative sites. I mean, it's an expansive list you're looking for, and I understand the frustration in terms of but you know, we didn't write CEQA. We're forced to implement it, and just making sure environmental review is clear. This neg deck, I think, gets you a long ways, and with a lot of properties. I don't know what the analysis will be if there's additional properties and or hours and or other differences that we're looking at, expanding the definition. So I mean, that's just sort of where we are.
Thank you. And then in that work that you did in the analysis, and I went through the ordinance, and there's some references to location, but not as extensive as I would have thought. And maybe I missed it and it's in another document, but setbacks to residential, setbacks to sensitive uses, you know, when do those get applied, or is that part of the CEQA work that was done?
Those limits are part of the CEQA review and the policy, so there's inherent setback in our riparian policy. So our policy references you must comply with riparian, which means a 100-foot setback. You can't face directly into it. So incorporated within Council Policy 6-4 are all those other policy requirements. We reference them in the environmental. It's how we base some of our decisions on sites that we knew sites that were already violating the riparian policy, they were kicked out. Sites that were too close to residential, we kicked those sites out. So it's part of the environmental document. When we reference the riparian policy, it's part of Council 6-4 that we've proposed to you today as well.
Thank you. So, and I guess for a layman then, if they're following this and they're interested in this and attended one of these community meetings and they don't know these policies by heart, what do those mean to them, and would I ever see one of these by my house? So I guess I was thinking from a community person's perspective, if they did ask a question, where are these going to be located? How close would they be to me? And that's why I was looking for that within this presentation or the ordinance or the memorandum, which is why I was asking the question, because if I did get asked the question, you know, me going and doing that research is a bit of work, not that I couldn't do it or wouldn't do it, but I was asking the question, is there somewhere we've got a clear sense of the setbacks and establishing these for the public interest and making sure that our community members are not going to be impacted, to give me some certainty that we're representing the public interest as well.
And we have more sign criteria in the policy, sign location, type, size, height, and number, and then they have some locational requirements in there as well, distances from residential, and so they could find that information there as well.
Okay, thank you. So then I'll jump ahead to the RFP process. You mentioned we wouldn't get the RFP out until late February, possibly. Is that right?
Yes, that's generally what we're thinking at this point. We'd come back to council probably mid-February, get council approval, and then send it out by late February.
Okay, so October, November, December. So we got 5 months to do an RFP, and that's the work around just doing the text of the RFP or additional work beyond writing the RFP?
So I think a couple of things, actually. So for the sites downtown specifically, there are 9 sites, 14 potential signs. A number of those sites have third-party stakeholders. We have our cultural facilities that have folks that are managing them, the organizations that are operating there on a regular basis. We thought it was premature to sit down with those organizations. We had a couple meetings with them. We informed them generally, as Ben mentioned from Team San Jose, that we were looking to follow this council direction, but we have not sat down with them and talked about kind of parameters of a program. Where would a sign potentially be located on one of those buildings? What would be the split of time that was potentially offered up to the city and the stakeholder tenant versus the amount of time that the sign would be sold? What is any potential revenue split with those stakeholder tenants, what would be their objectives in putting additional signage on those buildings. So we need a little bit of time to sit down and really meet in depth with each one of those stakeholder tenants and talk about coming up with a program and a parameters for downtown sign intensification that are really a win-win for both the city and for those stakeholder tenants. So that's going to take a little bit of time specifically. And then you factor in the holidays and you factor in additional workload, and we're just trying to be realistic about when this can really be kind of a thoughtful program that comes back to council that hopefully only has to come back once and will gain approval and be able to get out there on the streets.
Thank you. And I'll shift gears a little bit and raise some issues that some of the folks in the industry raised and see if I can get some clarification on them, mainly because these are the folks we're going to partner with. I know there was a letter submitted by SSE, the Sharks organization, around, let's see here, important that their signage rights not be disadvantaged in any way due to potential signage takedown preference language policy suggested for inclusion. Can you respond to that particular letter? I don't know if you saw it. Oh.
Here.
He's talking about the Sharks and the Sharks letter, and the just by way of background, when the city entered into the new and restated arena management agreement, it included the ability of the Sharks to get to boards or billboards and on city property. So that's a work that's sort of somewhat outside. I mean, we're going to need the general plan amendment and the policy, but it would be outside the RFP process.
So their concerns are one that we don't have to address in this. They're protected. Okay. Thank you very much for the clarification. And then a question for Councilmember Perales around the point system. And I was sitting here and paying attention, but you did withdraw that in its entirety, correct? Yes. Okay. And then the question around, I believe, splitting two different RFPs, one for city-owned sites and then one for the downtown area, and allowing folks to bid on that. Was that something you addressed? I don't remember in the comments. Are you comfortable doing that, or is that a question more for staff? I'm sure you're probably comfortable. And okay, maybe staff can speak to that.
Based on the policy, the council can issue however many RFPs you would like. You can issue an RFP for just downtown, outside of downtown for a certain type of sign. So you have the flexibility under the policy to issue however many RFPs and structure it however you wish per the policy. It's up to your discretion. So Block A would have to first come to you with a proposal of a certain type of RFP, and you could say, no, we want to do it a different way. That's up to the council per the policy.
Okay, thank you. So then would that be in the phase 2 component? And I'm not sure who I'm posing, or would that be in the phase 1 on the downtown? Okay, so that would be included in phase 1. Are you comfortable, Councilmember Perales, allowing for that staff or giving staff direction to do two different RFPs on those particular scope?
Pass the mic. Can I just ask staff, why was that not part of the initial recommendation? I see a benefit maybe in the staff recommendation, which was just to have it all as one, but is there any magic to that, or?
So in looking at what they've done in other locations, they have issued one RFP, like taking Denver, for example, they issued one RFP, but within that RFP, you can bid for specific sites or you can bid for multiple sites, right? So it's one RFP, it has kind of all of the sites in it, it has all of the parameters in it, it has all of the requests, and then you can leave it up to the companies to bid either for one site, for 2 sites, for 10 sites, for all sites.
Does that accomplish the same goal? And maybe if it doesn't, maybe somebody from the industry can see if that accomplishes the same goal. Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind, we also have our sign consultant here, David Ehrlich, who is the one of the founders of the Downtown Theater District in Denver. So maybe he can answer that question more specifically.
Thank you, David Ehrlich, with the Downtown Denver Theater District, and met some of you in Denver and consulting with the city. To that specific question, what we found in Denver was by allowing, let me take a step back, each media company has different objectives. So certain media companies find that typical installations are more within their wheelhouse, and other media companies, oftentimes the smaller or the medium size, like the unique locations. So what we faced in Denver was we had a variety of types of locations. And what we found was when we enabled people to bid on what they wanted to bid instead of forcing them to bid on everything, is we got a accumulation of bids that when you added them up all together were far more than we would have got one bid against one bid against one bid. So for example, a group like Out Front that is a national large organization that does great work was very excited about the placements we had on the main boulevard, Spear Boulevard. So their bid was for that was higher than maybe a smaller company that bid on the unique assets. And so that's a long-winded way of saying we found that flexibility actually, I guess the sum, I'm gonna mess this one up, sorry, it's been a while since algebra. The sum is greater than the whole of the parts, whatever that means. So when you allow media companies to focus on the locations they want most, you give them the flexibility to do that, you end up adding up a series of deals that are far more than what you get for one deal. Additionally, final point, is we found in 10 years in Denver that having multiple media companies, in a sense, competing both to have the best aesthetics and the best advertisers helped us, as opposed to a situation where you only had one media company in a majority or even monopoly type situation where they weren't as incentivized to keep raising rates and raising quality. So we found in Denver it was very effective.
Thank you. And as somebody who did attend that Denver trip and who's been supportive of this process, that's exactly the spirit I had intended from the beginning, and I think some of my colleagues as well, but I don't want to speak for them. So given that, how can we write this or give direction that provides clarity that this is the spirit of what we're looking for? Or in your mind, from the staff's point of view, is this how you're going to design the RFP already?
Yes, that's how we're going to design the RFP. We have the consultation. We have David Services, and the plan is for him to kind of guide us based on lessons learned from places like Denver and Atlanta, and he's also working in West Hollywood right now. So it's great to have those three kind of predecessors to help guide us, and then ultimately it comes to you all for approval.
Thank you. And then if I'll ask one individual from the industry, and I'll be a little bit biased, and maybe former Mayor Chuck Reed wouldn't mind answering a question around Orange Barrel and their interest based upon the conversation you've heard. And, again, we need to work with our industry partners. They are the ones that are going to be the ones working with us on this. Are you comfortable with the direction as you've heard from either Councilmember Perales and then also staff for clarification?
I think the way that David Ehrlich described the Denver approach is a good approach. It's really to allow the companies who value the sites to place the highest value on the sites, because Orange Barrel is not a billboard company. So they won't be interested in the citywide sites. And so if they have to take the citywide sites as part of the package, you're just not going to get the highest value from them. The same thing is true with some of the other media companies that are primarily billboard companies. They may not value the downtown sites. So if you allow people to say, this site is wonderful, I love this site, I'm going to put all my dollars on this site, you get people excited about individual sites, you're likely to end up with more money. And I think that's what they accomplished in Denver. So it's the flexibility for Orange Barrel's interest to be able to say, we like the 8 or 9 downtown sites, and we're going to bid high on that because we really think we can do something great with those.
Thank you. I'll take that as a yes. And I'll ask one more question, and I'll be done here. And I'll ask this of Clear Channel because they had raised some issues around the takedown. And if I could please ask you to come down and answer one question. And it's going to be similar to the same question I just posed. And based upon the direction you've heard from the council and from staff, again, being the industry individual that we're going to look to partner with, are you comfortable with the direction as it stands, or is there one red flag that stands out for you? And it might have been the takedown issue, if memory serves me correctly.
Clear Channel did not express a concern about the takedown ratio, but I think we're probably in a stronger position for that than some of our competitors, Orange Barrel, for example. So that was not something that we had expressed. That aside, what is your question?
Well, I think with the removal of the point system, does that affect the takedown?
Oh, yes. Well, we would prefer that you had a point system. I think when you're doing an RFP and you have this competitive environment, as you can well see, that's the way sort of I appreciated the level playing field, but I think that too is a playing field in a way, and that's saying that at least there's some credit for that, because it was part of the analysis for CEQA, was to say one of the benefits we get from this program is we have the removal of these other locations. So it may not be the same, it may not be the dollars that they show up in revenue per se, but it's a community benefit that should be able to be quantified in some way. So in the past, we've seen on other RFPs that typically there is some sort of a point system that you assign to these so that those making the proposal and those making the analysis have some foundation for making their decisions.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. So without a point system to evaluate the RFPs and the submittals, how would you address some of these, not these issues around takedown and precedent over that or priority of that?
Just to clarify, I believe that there probably will be a point system overall, right? So we'll have criteria and people will get a certain amount of points for different criteria. I guess I was just specifically speaking to this idea of additional points for the takedown. Yeah, so it's not that we won't have a point system. Yeah.
Got it. Thank
I
you
thought
for
that was the
clarification.
question, so just clarifying.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Then I'll stop there and allow my colleagues to jump in. And I do have one question for the city attorney again. And you talked about revenue from privately owned sites and our, I don't want to use the word inability, but we don't have an opportunity to gain any revenue on those. I've always thought back to some policies or programs we do have where it's highly encouraged for folks who do submit on things to provide a community benefit of some sort. And whether it's grants for the arts community or the SAP grants for education purposes and youth purposes, is that a possibility for us to highly encourage, of course, without a requirement?
Always. It's always a possibility. I mean, legally, it's how do you enforce that? I mean, and given, Colorado does not have Prop 218 or Prop 26, so they don't have the limitations that we do. I know San Diego looked at this program and didn't adopt it because of its California limitations. But you can always do a development agreement and negotiate something. That's probably the legal vehicle. Otherwise, it's encouraging without requiring.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone's patience.
Just want to clarify, based on the dialogue we just heard, so if this recommendation, I think the motion that's on the floor goes forward, just trying to understand what happens to phase one. That means phase one gets delayed for additional CEQA on additional sites. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and that delay is 9 to 18 months based on, I think, what Jenny said. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I don't disagree with what Councilmember Peralta said about the historic sequence of council direction that's clearly in the staff memo. What my point is that what we have learned since that council direction has been very important for us. I think first we've learned that extensive amount of planning time and staff time and CEQA analysis that has to be done on individual sites, which is clearly an obstacle to being able to move forward. And in this case, trying to make the perfect the enemy of the good means that we will be stalling by 9 to 18 months moving forward on this limited program. The second thing we've learned, I think, is that there's really zero public benefit in opening this up to non-city sites. It's purely commercial, private benefit. And I'm an advocate for growing jobs in our city where it benefits our own companies who are here. But this doesn't even do that. This just says folks can put up signs on private sites that will benefit, Chuck Chansey Casino, not necessarily any business in San Jose. So going to non-city sites will create zero jobs and zero city revenue. And the notion that we're going to have planning staff tied up in knots over what you already see is an enormous amount of time expenditure on what has been a very limited effort on phase one. To do that now and push into phase two means all the critical priorities of our city will lag behind as we are doing something purely for private benefit, purely for commercial benefit, not for a private company in San Jose that's hiring San Jose residents, just for companies who are making money off of advertising. And that's it. And so that is my concern with this approach. I think we really should take a hard look at what happens here with phase one. We have heard enormously from the industry. We have industry representatives here. I don't see representatives of our neighborhoods and our community who I know are going to want to be heard when we're launching into phase 2. And I'm certain that once we begin that, conversation is going to get even more difficult and even slower. And so I think we ought to take what we've got done, which is phase 1. I think we should move forward with it and learn what we learn. Councilmember Diep.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. If I could just start off on a kind of a tangent in this bit. Is this, Rosalind, also the general plan amendments, although we're focusing on the billboards and the downtown, but in these amendments, does this affect the signage, the on-site advertising along 237? Does that open that envelope area on the item that we were talking about? There's a South Bay construction site across from 237 in Telviso, and they've been wanting to put up an on-site billboard. And we were discussing that previously, but would these amendments allow that as well, or is that another item completely?
Yeah, that's a separate item
Okay.
completely,
All right,
council
so
member.
I'll
Yes.
move on from that. What I do want to say is the thing that I was focused on in this whole discussion was really the technical aspect of it, how bright the signs were and the lumens and the specs. So I really kind of went down the rabbit hole and went into the Muni code and looked at what we were trying to push through. And, 0.3 of a foot candle lumen, like that kind of thing. So I was fixated on this because over July recess, I drove through Las Vegas and then up into Salt Lake City. And up there in Utah, of course, they have beautiful natural scenery and they really want to protect from light pollution. But it was fascinating to me that Salt Lake City is the one city that I've been to that I've seen the most digital billboards just along the freeways ever. So I thought it was counterintuitive. But the signs there, the billboards there were designed in a way that as I was driving along the 15, I did not feel distracted. I felt the signs were well done. They were tasteful and they didn't cause glare. And if you drive down, say, Southern California 405 from the airport down into like San Diego, you'll see numerous digital billboards. Some of them have done well, some of them that are very garish that I do feel cause a distraction while you're driving. So I was fixated on the technical aspects, and when I saw what staff had worked on, I went and I called up Salt Lake City and all the billboard signs up there, and I talked to them, and this is the industry standard, I'm told. So I appreciate that, and good on you for that work. I tend to agree with the way that the mayor has framed this, but I guess for me, I agree that we should stay in phase 1. I agree that to give the city a bit of a leg up or even a monopoly in revenue would be a net plus for us. I'm not sure I quite agree with the mayor on supporting the Planning Commission's recommendation as opposed to staff's recommendation. Because if I understand it correctly, what we're fighting over is, or not fighting over, but what we're kind of debating here is whether to approve staff recommendation B. And that would lift the policy on the prohibition on billboards along freeways. Although that sounds scary, and it will probably need public input, from staff memo, lifting that prohibition does not automatically mean that it's open season to put billboards along our freeways. Any billboard that we do put up would still require CEQA or public interaction and public comment, but lifting that prohibition allows you to do, I guess, necessary staff work or research to answer a lot of the questions that council puts forward. Could you respond to that?
Certainly. So lifting the ban would allow for billboards on the 17 city-owned sites in phase 1.
But if we go the Planning Commission route and we only approve A, C, and D and not B, how does that limit what you're trying to do?
So the recommendation from Planning Commission was that the ban would only be lifted for city-owned sites only, so therefore we would not lift the ban for non-city-owned sites. So in essence, we would have a phase 1 program and not a phase 2, in essence.
So I think the Planning Commission approach was, let's modify staff recommendation and lift the ban for city-owned sites, and then as part of phase 2, one staff has proposed an overall phase 2 program on non-city-owned sites, then lifting the ban on sites throughout the whole city could be considered as part of that decision. So it was kind of a two-phased approach, or two cracks at the apple.
So if we go with the Planning Commission's recommendation, it wouldn't impact phase 2, or sorry, it wouldn't impact phase 1. It would just impede phase 2 in a sense.
It would not impact phase 1, and it wouldn't necessarily impact phase 2 either. It just means we would have to come back a second time with a general plan amendment. So we were trying to move forward quickly at council, as quick as we can with council's direction, and take care of the general plan amendment for phase 1 and 2 in one crack. But we could do it in 2 pieces, and it wouldn't necessarily I don't think it would just
Okay, well then I
phase
guess
2.
there's really no distinction. I mean, I disagree with the mayor that I think we should have a monopoly to revenue for a little bit. I do understand that phase 2 is purely for the private sector, and I think it would be wise to have some public input after we put up some signs and get the residents used to kind of the new and improved San Jose for a bit before springing it on them all at once. So I'll yield.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I want to see if our consultant, David, could come back down. Some of the comments being made in what like Councilmember Diep just reiterated was that there's no benefit for the city for these, potentially through phase 2. Is that a true statement, or could we see, kind of similar to what Councilmember Rocha said on community benefit agreements, could we see a benefit to the city through phase 2?
Yeah, no, I think the mayor makes a good point on the direct benefit, but I think both Denver and Atlanta provide good examples where the private property ends up having a community and a civic benefit. So in Denver, the district is made up of a board, and the government has members of the board. And so the things we do in Denver with the revenue we get from private property is governed in part by the city agency representatives. So for example, the most recent thing we did was we created a big arts incubator within the convention center. We used the revenue from private property and we created an arts incubator for local artists. So in a sense, that was a public benefit, but it was not necessarily guided directly by the mayor or anybody like that. And in Atlanta, different model. In Atlanta, the district is run by Central Atlanta Progress, which is the business improvement district. And so in that case, the government and that entity work very closely together. So there is, I guess, some indirect influence, but to your point, it's not direct influence. So I guess I would make it a distinction and say it's correct in that the city's not going to get revenue, but in both Atlanta and Denver, the city gets a significant benefit from what happens on private property within the district.
Councilmember Perales, could I just ask, perhaps Rick could comment, because he's talking about 2 cities outside the state of California, and I know there are considerable constraints about what we can extract in terms of benefits in these situations, and it might be helpful just to understand the distinctions.
Please.
Yeah, and I think in this case, as I understand it, again, I haven't really studied the model, just as a disclaimer. If all the private property owners that are part of a district, let's say you establish some kind of district similar to a CFD or an assessment district, if they agree to set up this district and want to fund it and put city people on the board or whatever, that's fine. But it takes property owner agreement. The city can't compel it. The city can't mandate it. And that may be a difference. Again, I don't know all the laws in Colorado or other cities, but...
Is that how it's done, David?
No, again, there's no direct economic benefit. So in Denver or Atlanta, the city gets no money from revenue generated on private property. But the activity that in both cities is that the money goes towards, art and cultural activity, is guided by stakeholder board members from the government. So I think it's, in a certain sense, maybe I'm being political here, I'm answering yes to both. The answer is, to the point the mayor made, he's correct. In Denver and Atlanta, the cities get no dollars. But because they're involved in the organizations that run the districts, they have influence on where the dollars go. And so when we do arts and cultural activity, the city is happy with that, or it fits their own mission, but it's indirect. It's not a direct result, if that distinction makes sense.
And that's great, as long as you get the property owners to agree to that and set it up.
And that sounds like that's what they did there, is the property owners agreed to it, or no?
So in Denver, we had a stakeholder board where there were 2 out of 7 board members appointed by the mayor. In Atlanta, it's just a separate bid, and so they coincidentally do things the government supports, but there was no new organization formed. In Atlanta, all the private revenue runs through the bid, and the bid board decides what to do with it, and they happen to work closely with the city, but there was not a new district formed in Atlanta or Denver.
And Rick, you're thinking that setup or something similar is not possible?
Well, it can't be compelled. I mean, again, it requires the voluntary effort on the part of, or voluntary agreement on the part of the property owners.
And David, was it compelled in these other cities?
No. So again, we had, I guess the way to answer it is it was not compelled, but if the city government in Denver or Atlanta didn't like what the district was doing, they couldn't stop it. There was a natural alignment between the city and the bid, or the city and the Denver Theater District, so that what each entity did fit in naturally with what the government wanted, but they had no veto power. They had there was no new bid form. There was no
So it
compelling.
doesn't sound like it was compelled, and it obviously are required, and it definitely is, as you're pointing out, is not direct revenue. But it is absolutely indirect benefit to the community, and it is guided by obviously some participation by those governments, those local governments.
Yeah, I can't speak to how you work with your bid. If for example, if the bid ran a district that retained money from private property owners in San Jose, and you felt comfortable with how they spent their money, you might conclude that there was a benefit.
We have examples like that. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that's helpful, and I think it's a clarifier for me. That's what I wanted to clarify was, you're right. Both things are right. We're not getting a direct benefit. We're not compelling it to happen. So there's not that direct correlation, and we certainly not in the way that we can require on city-owned property, and not at that level.
But if you're looking at the BID model, then that is something that the city's done in the past. The question is, it does require a property owner sign in or buy in.
Yeah, but it sounds like there's examples,
and
right, in these other
and
cities.
again, the city's regulatory power then is controlling it through what regulations it has vis-a-vis signage and what types of billboards.
Yeah, and I wasn't arguing that. I think, but what there is there's an example that there are indirect community benefits, and there are pathways to get to those community benefits that even include local government guidance and participation. Granted, no, compelling to do so, and so, but it's just, I think that to have the statement only be there's no benefit to the community, that's not the case that we're seeing in these other cities. We are seeing it. We are seeing community benefits to these other cities. So thank you, David, for pointing that out. And to the demotion and direction, yeah, I don't have an interest in delaying the process 9 to 18 months for this, especially considering that phase 2 may take that amount of time anyways to then incorporate some of my motion into what staff recommended, which was phase 2. But I did want to hash out sort of one last time in regards to what Councilman Rocha pointed out, which is the opportunity for individual CEQA analysis on these individually proposed sites from the industry. Could that not be done, especially if we're talking about not a large amount, a small handful, could that not be done within the time frame that we are already planning to release an RFP, where if the industry completes the where the industry completes a CEQA analysis on sites that they are proposing outside of what we've already looked at, if that could be done within the next 5 months, because we're expecting maybe before March, could those not then be included? And that is really the spirit of my recommendation number 1 in my memo.
Thank you, Council Member. So I think it could be possible. Obviously, if someone wanted to conduct their own environmental clearance for their site and could do it quickly, like before the time period that we're bringing back the RFP to the council for further direction and for your action, it is possible that that would be and could be conducted. However, I would add that with that, the City Council would also have to amend the City Council Policy 6-4 to add any additional sites as well.
I'd at least like to leave that door open. I understand that there's a possibility, right? We talked about worst case, and I asked for a best case scenario. I don't think the best case scenario was the 9 to 12 months. I think what I just described to you and what we just talked about is the best case scenario. So I think worst case scenario, I'm not interested in that. But I am interested in keeping the door open for this opportunity we just discussed. And so that is the spirit of what I have, tried to get to with recommendation number 1. And if we can get there, even knowing that there's this extra step, which, updating the code and if there's a few sites that are proposed and if the SQL analysis is complete, and then we can throw those into the mix of the RFP, I would like that to be a possibility. And so please go ahead.
I see.
We're sort of looking at each other here, but I just want to say, I think, so if I understand it correctly, that you have 17 identified sites that get SQL clearance. When you do the RFP, you allow the proposers to come in on these sites, or they can propose an alternative city site, knowing that they have to do the environmental analysis at the time that if they do bring in an alternative site,
yes.
and then it would have to be added to the policy, but that clearance would have to be done and added to the policy
yes.
before anything could be done.
Yes.
And I'm looking at planning staff to see if they're comfortable with that approach.
That would be part of the RFP. You would solicit the proposals for the extra sites. With that, they would come forward with the sites that not only meet environmental clearance, but they also need to meet the criteria of the approved
It
policy.
still has to be within the policy.
Yeah.
Right.
If it's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is it meets the policy, and the environmental review has to be done. But I think there's something we could work with, and that's number 1.
Yes, that is just number 1. Yeah. So if that's comfortable, that would be my direction with number 1. I will clarify then the issues, I think, with number 2, and then Rick, I think it was for A, B, and C, right? Was all 3. And A, we described, there seems to already be a resolution to that. So within staff's memo. So I would be comfortable with then recommendation 2 and 4B and C of my memo being incorporated into phase 2. And then, so that would be the only amendment to the direction, still the same motion with the clarifications we just made around recommendation 1.
Clarification from City Attorney Doyle. So if you issue the RFP and you can include and you can find additional sites, could anybody then find their own additional sites and then bid on each other's additional sites? Or if you find those sites, then you are awarded the signs for those sites?
No, I would think it would be that they're open. Anybody can, if it goes in RFP, everybody bids on it.
Yeah, and it's an alternative site.
Yeah.
It's truly an alternative site.
Mm-hmm.
So long as it meets the policy requirements and they do the environmental clearance, and then the council would have to come back. I mean, it would have to come back to council, obviously, for approval. All it does is it gives, through the RFP process, you're giving someone to say, okay, bid on these 17 sites, or come up with an alternative that fits the policy, and if the city says that's a better site, then the environmental analysis has to be done as part of that as well.
So if a sign company comes up with an alternative site as a response to the RFP, and the council agrees and amends the policy, do the other sign companies now have the opportunity to also take a bid on that site as well, or is it really belong?
I think no. I think it's part of the RFP that says you either pick one of those, or you yourself come up with an alternative site that may be better.
Okay.
I think that's all factored into the RFP.
Okay.
And then just one additional question. The environmental clearance would happen when they come back and propose the alternate site. Then it would be, if the council accepted it, it would be contingent upon being environmentally cleared.
Right.
Okay.
It wouldn't be contingent at the time it was approved by council. That's when you get your clearance.
And these would be city-owned site, not city-controlled, city-owned sites.
Yeah, I mean, council member, this is something that we probably need to sit down with my planning attorneys and the planning department to make sure we work it through. I think we got the concept, if that's where your motion and if it passes, but there's obviously a lot of what ifs and questions.
Would city right away or remnant profit be included in city-owned sites? If somebody,
I think that's much broader. That is, and I'd like to have the opportunity to sit down with the VTA and talk that through, because we do have an understanding on bus shelters, and we've had an agreement in the past. So that's something I'd like to come back, but offline I'd like to have that conversation.
so that if somebody went through the process themselves, like we just described, and they proposed a site and were willing to do the CEQA clearance for it, and it happened to be on city-owned right-of-way, that wouldn't flow the same way we just described?
Well,
and why not?
It might not. That's something, again, I want to sit down. I don't have the benefit of my planning people here.
Because it seems to me like it should flow the same way, where if they're willing to do the CEQA analysis and if that work gets done in time, then they propose it and it's part of
the right of way is so broad. I mean, you talk about environmental analysis. I mean, that's something that's throughout the entire city. So I mean, I'm more comfortable.
But if they're willing to do this, if they're willing to do the environmental clearance,
well, I think we, again, this is something we need to sit down and revisit. And so I'm comfortable with number 1, but not number 2 or number 4.
So are you saying then there's an opportunity to revisit my recommendation number 2 and potentially fold that in the same way we're describing with recommendation number 1?
I don't know. There's an opportunity to sit down with the VTA and talk about their specific agreements that we've had in the past on the right-of-way and bus shelters.
Okay.
But in terms of expanding this signage program, I think that's a different animal.
Okay, I guess I still am not fully clear then what the opportunity might be for, if somebody's going to want to propose a site and it's on city right-of-way. Is the opportunity to wait for phase 2 to complete?
I think that's a phase 2. It's again, it is so vast. I mean, factor in all the city right-of-way. It's a very broad area.
Okay. So then in the definition for 1, it's city-owned property.
Yes.
So I can be comfortable then with my restated motion if you guys would like me to state it again. Unless you got it.
Councilmember Perales, do you want to take a shot at restating your motion so everyone's clear?
Sure. So it'd be moving my memo, which would exclude recommendation number 5. Recommendation 1 would still be allowed under the interpretation that what Rick just described with planning staff, giving somebody an opportunity if they're willing to do the CEQA analysis themselves, and that's included in the RFP process. Recommendation 2 and 4B and C would move into phase 2. And I think that clears up the issues that you had brought up, Rick.
And it still includes recommendations 6 and 7, is that correct?
It still includes recommendations 6 and 7, yes.
For clarification on recommendation 6, Councilmember Perales, I know as you know, the city's Vision Zero strategy pertains more than just pedestrian safety, but to traffic safety. So are you amenable to?
Oh, yeah, that's more of a oversight typo on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured. So it would address general safety.
Yes, general.
Okay.
Yeah, as stated in Vision Zero policy, yeah. Our Vision Zero policy, fortunately, does not speak about aviation. So
yeah. Okay. All right. So that's the motion, and the seconder I've forgotten.
I think it was Don.
Don. Okay. Councilor Rocha, you're fine with that. Okay. All right. Councilor Camus.
Yeah. So I am trying to square the circle here. I'm interested in hearing from the consultants here about this new CEQA process that we are just about to vote on here, that Raul was recommending. I don't know if anybody's from the industry can come down and talk, and maybe Ryan Brooks or okay. So what are your thoughts as to what we put forward here? Is it workable?
Usually my voice kind of carries the room, so thank you. Ryan Brooks with Outfront Media. 2 points I want to cover. One on being able to compel a company on private property, we do it all the time. Cities do it all the time. The city of South San Francisco just 2 weeks ago signed an agreement with Outfront Media. We're on private property. We're giving them it's public document, $500,000 up front and $3 million over 3 years. City of Berkeley, we did it also. The Bates soccer field, we were compelled, wrote a check for $1 million for that soccer field. Happens all the time through development agreements. Whether you take up on that policy or not, that's up to you. I just wanted to clarify what you're allowed to do under the law, because we do it right now in many cities across California. To the CEQA question, I think Councilmember Morales actually hit the nail on the head. If there's alternative sites, as you call them here, the industry is more than welcome to go out and do our own analysis. We can bid on that site, and the city council can either accept it or reject it. It's a pretty smooth process. It's a process that's not going to take 9 or 18 months, because we can do it on our own. We can do it much faster, hire our consultants to get out there, and we go through the 21-day public comment period and so on.
Okay, thank you. And maybe I'm getting old, but I thought the original intent was one of the benefits of having the non-controlled sites was to remove billboards from other parts of the city, and I thought we were going to get that as a good, because we were going to be removing 5 signs, or I forget what the number was. 4 to 1. That's what I thought we were going to get as benefit.
Sure.
In phase 2. That's what my understanding was. Maybe I'm wrong.
That's typical in cities across, not just California, but cities across the United States. That's the typical benefit. I know the staff worked hard a long time at a 4 to 1 ratio. Reduce the total number of signs in the city. Huge benefit to residents. They have to follow the criteria. They have to be in non-residential areas. All the criteria that's set forth in the memo that was put out by staff. It's a huge benefit to cities. The revenue component obviously is great, because if you're on city-owned property, you become our landlords.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right.
My next question is for staff.
Thank you for your time.
Maybe give them back the microphone. We're microphone light today. So I was also wondering, I've had an issue with a developer on North San Jose, just past the 237 line, being able to put up a sign on his own building with a company logo, because our sign ordinances don't apply to anything past 237. And when I talked to you, Rosalind, you said that would be handled in phase 2 of this sign code, if I recalled correctly. If we don't, am I recalling correctly, or is this being handled in another way?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, we did speak about this particular site, and actually, that particular site is not going to be handled in phase 2 of this work. It's actually going to be handled in our normal, we come to council with quarterly updates to our zoning code and sign code, so we're actually using that process for that particular site. So it's a quarterly update.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood in our meeting. Okay, thank you. And yeah, I think I'll be supporting the current motion on the table.
The gentleman who just spoke, if you might be able to come back down, I'd appreciate it. I just want to understand better what this mechanism by which people voluntarily give money. Because boy, do we want to take advantage of that. I believe, sir, I mean, forgive me for forgetting your name, but you're the consultant working with Denver, is that right? If I could ask you first, and then I'll ask the other gentleman. You indicated that neither Denver nor Atlanta had formal community facilities districts or districts of that nature. Am I wrong? Did I mishear you?
No. So in Denver, we created a separate nonprofit, and the nonprofit administered the district. They received the revenue, and then they spent money on art and cultural activity, and that nonprofit had a stakeholder board, and there were 2 members appointed by the mayor. In Atlanta, the district is essentially run completely by the Business Improvement District.
Right. And so if some private property owner decides they want to put up a sign, they have the entitlement to go do so, what tells them they have to contribute?
So that's a great question. Basically, the way we have a legislation that creates the district. Within the legislation in Denver, we created one sign plan to govern the district. That sign plan is administered by the nonprofit. Within the sign plan itself in Denver, it says if you want to put up a sign, you have to show evidence that you're supporting the aims and goals of the district, which are to invigorate the streets with light and activity. One way to do that is to sign a services agreement. And so every media company in Denver has signed a services agreement, and via the services agreement, we collect the revenue and we do the activity. And you look skeptical, but it's...
Yeah, no, I'm not skeptical that you're, I'm sure you're telling the truth. I'm looking at Rick saying, how could we ever do this under California law? I know San Diego tried this, and Rick, do you want?
No, I know it's been the topic of a discussion that when it first came up, and I don't have the benefit of that memo, but the issue is one that, we have restrictions on whether it's an exaction, but there are limitations on assessments, fees, taxes in California that are very strict. I know the city of San Diego, the city attorney's office looked at it, and they opted that they couldn't do it. And so, I mean, that is something that, again, I'm always willing to look at creative ways, new ways to look at things. But as of this point, I don't know how we have business improvement districts. We have things that parties can voluntarily agree to, but I don't know how we can.
Oh no, I agree. I want to be clear. What I'm telling you we do in Denver and Atlanta has been made clear. Those specific structures may not work. My previous discussions from council member were, even given that, you're correct. There's a prohibition in California that doesn't exist in Atlanta and Denver that stops a direct economic flow. But my only point to make was what council member pointed out was, I would argue there are significant indirect benefits that we get in both cities that the city gets. But I don't disagree with exactly what you just said. The pathways in Denver and Atlanta are probably not available in California. I think the gentleman from the industry pointed out a different example.
Yeah, and I wanted to go there next, and certainly, perhaps maybe you could pass the mic, and we may come right back to you. I'm just trying to flesh this out, really.
Thank you,
so
Mr. Mayor.
And I appreciate what you had to offer. I assume those were related to developer agreements or development agreements. Is that right?
Yeah, so our latest example, and you can probably just Google it right now because it was just 2 weeks ago,
right.
with the city of South San Francisco. It was a development agreement with the city.
And what happens if the company doesn't want to sign a development agreement? What if they say, I have a legal right to put a sign up just like everybody else does, so why do I have to sign this?
So some of the challenges, one of the reasons why you don't see a proliferation of signs throughout the whole state of California is because
I'm sorry, I can't hear right now. If perhaps, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. One of the reasons why you don't see a proliferation of signs throughout the state of California are because there are multiple laws that prevent that. Usually with the Outdoor Advertising Act, it could be landscaping or it could be spacing. The scenario in the city of South San Francisco, we had an opportunity for one location only. We needed to get permission through the city council. It was on private property, that city-owned property. The city council said, sure, we'll look at the model that's been successful in other cities. We'll do a development agreement. The cities have been doing development agreements for years.
As we have as well.
Yeah, you do for years. Someone's going to build a building here. You want the developer to have 20% to, nonprofits, homeless, or have to put, dollars into a bank of money. The city of Los Angeles is looking at development agreements. We did a development agreement with the Mayor Bates years ago. We wanted to build a sign on private property. And part of that development agreement, we had to put $1 million in the bank so he could build the Mayor Banks playground.
No, I'm not disputing the fact there are development agreements out there. I'm just trying to figure out how exactly we can mandate that someone has to enter a development agreement with us for the right to be able to put up a sign.
The same way you mandate development agreements for commercial buildings in the city, private buildings, private developers in the cities. The process itself is no different, and the process has been a proven process because it's happened in multiple cities across California. We do it all the time.
And again, there's an issue with whether or not a city can require a development agreement. I typically think the parties want development agreements. Sure. Typically, developers want it more than the city does because they're investing. But there isn't a mechanism where we can legally require as a city that you enter into a development agreement if the zoning and then you can get this stuff by right.
just going through the normal application process. So,
But as you,
but I think we would encourage development agreements, but I don't know if we can.
Yeah, I think you did. I think you know, well said. You said by right. Right now, there's no by right here in the city of San Jose. So we would look for a public-private partnership to sit, you know, across the desk from you and create that development agreement. Cities do it all the time. I mean, it's a tool that we constantly use.
All right, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that other cities may have gotten away with it. I'm just not sure it's anything we can mandate, and that's my concern. Once we create the right, once the genie's out of the bottle, I don't know how we constrain it, and that's where I've been concerned about with regard to phase 2 from day one. Okay, Councilmember Diep.
So I don't necessarily oppose what Councilman Perales is trying to fold in, but I guess I do take caution because my thinking is that if we move forward with phase 1, what happens in phase 1, the feedback we get in phase 1 will inform what the council wants to do in phase 2. So I guess I'm a bit just uncomfortable with the motion on the floor right now where we're basically saying, let's stay in phase 1, but let's fold in some instruction for when we get around to phase 2. That instruction will just be there waiting to hatch. I think, you know, whether it's 6 months or 9 months or a year from now, whenever we initiate phase 2, we'll want to look at it with fresh eyes. So for that reason, I don't think I can support the motion on the floor, just because I do think we want to look at it anew and not, you know, 18 years before we start it, you know, have underlying instruction already.
Councilmember Perales.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Staff had mentioned in regards to what I pointed out, which is if we create an RFP, let's say, for instance, for items 4B and 4C with this background and the hours changing, that if ultimately we did change it in phase 2, there was something you could address in the RFP now that would, you know, be able to speak to that.
What we were talking about before is if you were going to wrap it into this first phase, and depending on the timing of the RFP and when this work could be done. But now that we've moved on to wrapping it into phase 2, it would not be part of the RFP.
Sorry, to clarify, you asked if you wanted to have further environmental for 4B and 4C, could they do that while we wait to issue the RFP? So the ND has well, Jenny, do you want to answer this? Can you get additional environmental clearance right now for B and C to progress so that by the time the RFP is issued, then those sites that have those issues can be cleared? Is that what you're asking, Councilmember?
I don't know. I can explain it again. So
I don't think that's what
it's. I would have hoped that these amendments are ready for this, you know, backgrounds and say the 5 p.m. versus 6 p.m. was already folded into this first RFP. It's not. So if it could, great, but I'm hearing it could take a while, and I don't want it to take that long. So that's why I was okay with it maybe moving to phase 2. But if it moves to phase 2, and we're going through obviously a process right now with phase 1, how do we address that, you know, in the future, if the policy amends to where it's, you know, the second RFP now allows till 5 a.m., do we retroactively go back and say, hey, okay, now for anybody who won out the RFP process in phase 1, now you may be able to now operate at 5 a.m. versus 6 a.m.
Right, so it's not the RFP that controls the hour, it's the level of environmental clearance. So the ND has a requirement that signs be shut off at by 6, not on until 6, because we said there were certain environmental implications that we're not violating by having that requirement. So it's not part of the RFP, it's part of your base environmental clearance. So in phase 2, we'll reevaluate moving that limit to 5 a.m. through, we have to study that. So by the time you get to phase 2 and you issue a new RFP, if we studied that and felt that there are no environmental impacts, it wouldn't even be an issue because we would have evaluated it.
I got that. I just want to be clear then.
Yeah,
Somebody who was to win a bid.
Right. So if in phase 2, we evaluate having signs go on at 5 a.m. and there's environmental clearance for that. The council changes the policy and says now they can go on at 5 p.m.
So then
5
somebody who had
a.m.
won the
Those
bid-
signs that were already allowed through the RFP, and you can correct me, could now turn their signs on
Okay,
at 5
that
versus
was
6.
That was a clarification I was looking
And
for.
also, just to clarify, there wouldn't be an RFP in phase 2, because in phase 2, that would be signs on privately owned sites, and
Okay.
that would be up to
Got it.
the private owners to handle whatever their arrangements are going to be.
More clear, yes, thank you. It was more around this what would have to be done, again, a CEQA clearance. But then that's what I was really looking for, is individuals who had won the RFP process in phase 1, they would then now, the time would just change. And so they just don't know that today. Okay, and I understand concerns from my colleague, Councilmember Diab. I think it's more along the lines of Direction 7 in regards to beginning the work of phase 2. Again, we've been at this, since 2015, and we're hearing this phase 2 could take 9 to 18 months, right? I think we have plenty of time to figure those things out and to see what to learn from phase 1 and to also incorporate that education into phase 2. I don't think we have to wait, or else I may not be in the council. So I'm going to keep my motion as is.
Thank you. So based upon the conversation that we heard from the industry rep and the development agreement, did we consider now providing direction to include that for further evaluation from staff? Or so in what context, though, would we be providing that direction? I guess I'm looking.
So Councilmember Perales can't respond without a mic, so you have to pass it to him.
I'm reading his mind right now. Go ahead.
It gives you a tactical advantage if he doesn't have one.
Maybe it's a question for Rick. I mean, I would be supportive of what we just heard, that it sounds like we have an industry, thank you, Dave. We have an industry representative saying other cities are taking advantage of what it looks like our city attorney is hesitant to take advantage of. And so if there's a way to do so, however we can mimic what's happening in these other cities, yes, I mean, I would obviously be,
I'm sharing your same concern too. I think the issue here is not staff, it's actually our city attorney's office been in the way the whole gosh darn time. So go ahead, Rick.
Okay, Don, thanks. Or council member, excuse me. Again, it gets down to what can you legally require, and I'm happy to talk to other cities and see how they do it. Development agreements are encouraged. Oftentimes the developers want them more than the cities do. So, I mean, that's just sort of the reality. I think what I'd envision, and this is really more of a phase 2, it's more of on development agreements that would be on private property, because I think to the extent you're talking city-owned property, we have more control there, and so a development agreement is sort of like a non-issue in my mind. Development agreement on where you'd have some kind of private, and again, the phase 2, I think that's something you'd look at. We could come back to council at the time we came back with phase 2. I would envision a part of the RFP process, that when you go out with an RFP process, well, we wouldn't be doing RFP on private. So we would have probably come back with to the council at the time that a phase 2 was up for consideration, and would talk about how we would structure it to try to, and again, strongly encourage development agreements. If we can go beyond that, I'm happy to join in, but I'd be the first to talk to those other cities and see how they do it.
Thank you. And if I could pose to staff, as I know we've got a sense of when the RFP would return to council. And when that comes back to council, that is for, what would that action be? Just to approve the RFP language and that's it, and give you direction to go out further or to go out with the RFP? Is that the scope of that action that particular council day?
Yes. So we'll come back with a proposed RFP. It'll talk about criteria and parameters for the RFP, the types of responses that we're looking for. It'll have all of kind of that standard information. We will outline that people can either bid on multiple sites or one site. And so then once we receive approval, it'll go out. It'll probably be out on the street, just ballparking 30 days or so, a month. It will come back in. We'll evaluate the RFPs and the responses, and then we'll go from there. I would assume there'll be a little bit of time where we're selecting the providers, and I believe that we have to come back to council also with the awards on the RFP. So
Okay.
once we've selected who that will be, coming back and reporting back on that.
Thank you. And what's the form of that agreement with the bidder, if we choose one? Is it a development agreement? Is it a contract? What is the form that we enter with them?
I'm actually going to defer to Rick on that.
And I was reading an email. What form of
What form, when the bids come out, we select a bidder, what form is that agreement with that bidder? Is it a contract? Is it a development agreement? What is that?
it would be some kind of agreement, and we could do it in the form of a development agreement. I think it's our own property, so that we have a lot more leeway.
So then we could potentially incorporate the direction on the development agreement into that to have it brought back to us as part of that action. February. Okay. And sure.
I think that staff may have envisioned a lease originally because you're essentially leasing city property. But I mean, how we structure it, I mean, we're going to get the revenue if that's your goal, and whether it's a development agreement or a lease or whatever agreement you have in place.
Thank you. Then I would, recommend that it's a development agreement form given the conversation we've had here. Now, the engagement with the industry between now and then as you develop the RFP, is there any, or do you see having further conversations based upon the direction today?
I envision working very closely with we brought on a consultant to help us with this, so I envision us working very closely with him on this matter, looking at what other cities have done. I think we also, again, need to keep a level playing field, and so I anticipate if we anticipate people putting in proposals, we probably will not be seeking guidance from those companies that we think are going to be putting in proposals. I feel like we have adequate resources to formulate an RFP and bring something forward to council for your approval without doing that in order to maintain that playing field.
Got it. Thank you. But there are occasions where we do have a little bit of a developer roundtable and invite folks in as we're writing out the RFP. That wouldn't be the first time that that's happened, or no?
It's one thing to get ideas on an RFP. It's another thing to get people participating in the creation of RFP because they have a conflict of interest in the outcome. So they'd be conflicted out of even proposing. So it's one thing to get sort of a generic, this is the type of stuff we're going to look at, and any ideas. But when you're getting specific direction or specific input, and one can skew the RFP to their advantage, and there's an inherent conflict.
Then I guess really the opportunity is that council meeting where we can still make modifications on the dais based upon community input. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions? Last questions, Councilmember Pross?
Just a clarification. So I wanted to see, is this RP coming back to the council? Yes. Full council or committee or?
Yes. No, to the council.
Full council. Okay. All right. That was it. And I don't know if there would need to be an amendment to the motion. I don't know if that's where you were getting to, but obviously if there is a pathway to generate some revenue, whether it's through a development agreement or however, certainly that's our hope, right?
You're going to get revenue. It's
not on the, I'm not talking on the private
non-city properties.
I'm talking on the non-city property. So, which it sounds like there's pathway here. We're seeing it happening not only in other states, but clearly we're now hearing it's happening in other cities in California. So if there is a pathway, yeah, absolutely, I would want whatever that mechanism is, if it is a development agreement, to be incorporated into our private property, so through phase 2. And if we can figure that out with phase 1 and consider it be a development agreement, maybe that's it. That is what it is. But I think it really is important to be with phase 2. So.
Yes, that's our intention. Our intention is to figure out that component of it. When we go to phase 2 and phase 1, we don't really need that since the city is the property owner, and it'll be the...
Yeah. Comfortable with that then. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, let's vote on the... Councilor Jimenez? I don't believe that, but go ahead.
So the question I had is, let's just assume, well, you know, if this passes, move forward to phase one, it's complete, we move forward to phase two. What's the likelihood of some of these billboards just popping up in neighborhoods from one day to the next? I mean, it's still going to have to go through the normal process in which, you know, they're not going to be able to do it by right or anything like that, right? I mean, they're going to have to go through the normal planning process and such. Is that?
Correct. The policy would require that they go through a development permit on private sites, not on public sites.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, on the motion. I think Dave is proud of me here because our emergency generator is going to shut off in about 27 minutes, and we're all going to be in the dark. So I recommend that we vote. Oh, I accidentally pushed yes. Forgive me. That was supposed to be a no vote. That was my mistake. I was so eager to move on. You're right. I did. Is there a mulligan? Do they allow that? I was just so happy to be done. Okay, here we go. Okay, we're voting again. Thank you for putting up with my mistake. All right, that motion passes. All right, we are now on to open forum. I have no cards, so everyone have a great night.